Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Today, in 6 terrifying true cemetery horror stories, we step through the rusted gates of cemeteries where names are carved in stone, flowers wither overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name. Because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I never thought I'd write this down, but last night the heat kicked on in my apartment and the vent under my couch breathed my name so clearly that I stood up and said, "What?" out loud to an empty room. I've had a lot of time to make excuses for it, thin metal whistling the way old buildings settle, but there was a shape to it, a rhythm like someone speaking through a cracked reed. If it was a fluke, it shouldn't have kept happening when the heat clicked off. The air went still. The vent said my name again, a notch quieter, and then said Mara's. Mara is my sister. She thinks I'm dramatic. She says that because I used to call her from our parents' house when we were teenagers and tell her the foxes in the woods were laughing at me. She lives 3 towns over, and she's the one who sent me the Vermont link in the first place. You like weird stuff? Check out this cemetery thing. That was in late September, right after the first real cool night. The post said mourners were complaining about a headstone that whispered to them, and I thought the same thing you're thinking. Clickbait, tourist bait, Halloween marketing. The photos were convincing enough. Gray slate, old as a cracked molar, no name left, just a faint lamb and a sawtooth border. The pin dropped to a hillside cemetery in a village called Larch Hollow, which is less a town than a blink in the 2-lane map north of Montpelier. I've driven past Larch Hollow maybe a dozen times on my way to hikes. Coffee in a paper cup, a station on scan. I sent the link to my friend Nate because Nate collects ghost stories the way other people collect vinyl. He worked at the bookstore in town and still talks like the break room has a mic pointed at his mouth. He said we should go. He said it the way he does when he's already rearranging his shift in his head. Like backing out would be a betrayal to the story, not me. I told him we could go Saturday, and he said we should go Friday in the daylight, to prove it wasn't going to be anything. And then go Saturday at dusk so that if it was something we'd have a baseline. That was Nate. He brought a tote bag with a digital recorder, a thermos, and a roll of blue painter's tape. For a perimeter, he said and shrugged. Or to label things. He wore fingerless gloves and his grandmother's watch so it looked like time was trying to warm its hands through his skin. Larch Hollow's cemetery was exactly the kind of place you tell yourself you'll remember in the spring, and then don't. Narrow gate, chain looped but not locked. 2 quartz pebbles on the fence post where someone's hand liked to rest. The grass had gone to straw at the edges and was thick and green under the shade trees. There was nobody around except a woman in a yellow raincoat tugging an old beagle that wanted to sniff each stone, as if they were letters to him personally. She nodded at us and said, "Beautiful day for it," in that Vermont way that drags weather over everything like a shared blanket. We found the stone because we could hear it. That's not dramatic. It was like the sound the ocean makes in a shell, but lower and without the illusion of waves. A wet, steady whisper, the sound of someone practicing the alphabet through their teeth. It wasn't in words, not at first. The stone itself was half sunk, slate flaking like fish scales on the edges. A lamb carved shallow so its ears were a suggestion more than a feature. There was no name. The border was triangles marching along the top like a picket of dull teeth. Nate crouched and the whisper went higher, as if his closeness tuned it. "Great," he said, breath fogging. "There's a little hollow under there. It's wind." The stone sat on a knuckle of dirt that had sunk over time. The ground was uneven, lumpy where other stones had settled. The grass grew patchy around it. And if I'd been thinking about it, I might have noticed that the patchiness wasn't random. It was a scatter in lines, thin scars where a rabbit might have burrowed. But I wasn't looking at the ground. I was hearing the whisper and feeling my lungs try to sink to it. Nate put his hand on the stone and then took it away. "Cold," he said. colder than it should be." He looked toward the church, the white clapboard on the hill across the road, sun bouncing off it like a friendly mirror. "There's probably a culvert or something." We stayed a half hour. The whisper never stopped. It didn't get louder or softer when the wind moved, only quicker, like someone was getting excited in conversation. A pickup slowed at the road as if to decide whether to pull in, then went on. The beagle howled once and then carried his howl with him down the way, the woman in the yellow coat laughing and apologizing to us for nothing. When we left, I turned back at the gate and tried to fix the lamb in my head, to be able to draw that exact drowsy sadness of the face if I had to. Saturday, we went back an hour before sunset. It had rained in the afternoon, one of those quick stick-and-lift showers that made everything smell like pennies and old leaves. The whisper sounded wetter. There were 3 other people in the cemetery that time. A man with a baseball cap pulled down so far the brim almost touched the bridge of his nose, a girl with a camera hanging from her neck on a pink strap, and someone in an old army jacket who never got closer than the lilac bush near the road. They all circled. They all looked like people circling a street performer trying not to look like they're circling. A white Subaru pulled up and parked crooked against the curb, and a woman got out who had the authority of a person who wore a name tag 5 days a week. She had a clipboard and a braid as thick as my wrist. "Afternoon," she said, and I expected her to tell us the cemetery was closed, but she didn't. She walked straight to the stone and squatted the way Nate had and listened like it was a diagnosis she might miss if she wasn't careful. "I'm Ruth," she said finally, without standing up. "I'm from St. Luke's, Pastor. If you're going to post things, please don't trespass after dark." "The town's asked me to say that." Nate looked at me, at Ruth, at the stone. "Is it true you're going to remove it?" She sighed, and if you've never heard someone sigh like they're laying a card on a table, that's what it sounded like. "We're considering it." "The families don't like it. Does it say names?" I asked before I could help myself. "Does it say their names?" Ruth stood. She had rain on her braid and little jewels. "It says something," she said. "That's enough." She looked at each of us. Her eyes were the sort of blue you get used to in the mountains and then miss when you go back to a city. "Be respectful. If you leave anything, coins, stones, prayers, keep it modest." She looked at Nate's bag with the tape. "No tape." He nodded like she was an airport gate agent and he'd been preemptively forgiven for his overstuffed carry-on. "Can we leave a recorder?" he asked. "I'll put it in the stone dish up there. I won't touch the slate." Ruth hesitated and then said, 1 hour. As if she'd already had this negotiation with other people. As if she'd already had worse and had decided to pick her battles at the place where the dead were trying to speak through the weather. We left the recorder and walked in a slow square, up to the far corner where the hill dipped, and you could see over the stone wall to the cut of road and the one blinking light of a diner sign nodding in the wind. The girl with the pink strap took her photos with the shutter sound on, though her camera definitely had a quiet mode. The man in the baseball cap kept touching the brim like it had to be reminded not to fly away. The one in the army jacket smoked without moving, and the smoke drifted across the stones in strips. When we came back, the recorder had slid off the little dish. It was still on. The time had advanced by 38 minutes. Nate clicked it off and we walked out of the gate because we wanted to listen in the car, where sound felt contained and manageable and not like it had a body to squat in, the way it did in that cemetery. You've heard recordings of the ocean in a shell? It was like that, plus a throat. There were words if you wanted there to be words. If we set our minds to apple, we heard apple. If we set them to help, we heard help. If we set them to names, we heard names. And here's the part where I tell you we heard Mara and then tell you it was a coincidence. And you can call me a liar or a bad scientist. But the recorder said Mara without us thinking of Mara. It said it with a soft R the way our grandmother used to say it. It said it twice and then it said my name. It didn't say Nate's. Nate laughed and said, "You got a ghost with preferences," and then said, "I'm kidding," too fast to make it sound like he was. We took the recorder back to my place. By then the light was gone and the street outside had that hollow early night feeling, where the neighbors' flats screen them into their own glow worlds. I put on the kettle because I always put on the kettle when I don't know what to do. Nate set the recorder on the coffee table, rewound, and hit play. And the whisper was softer away from the headstone, muffled by my walls, normal. It was audacity. It was our brains wanting to match patterns. It was throat and air. We told ourselves those things out loud, then quieter, the way you start a prayer and hope it doesn't become one. Mara texted me at 9. Did you get spooked yet? I sent her the clip. She wrote back, that is you messing with me. I said it wasn't. She wrote, okay, well then that is your phone mic doing a thing. I said we didn't use the phone. She sent a skull emoji, then a laughing one, then, because she's a good sister, a flashlight emoji. Seriously, I texted. Don't go there after dark. The pastor asked. She wrote, dude, I have a toddler. My after dark is brushing my teeth and pretending I don't hear my husband chip the ice tray like a lumberjack. She called me on Sunday, and I could hear her little boy in the back asking for the Paw Patrol socks where the dog has the helmet, not the one with the truck. She said, listen, my friend Lynn says the cemetery is doing this thing where they remove a stone. They're considering, I said. They already did, she said. She drove by. There's a backhoe. They put orange fencing up around it. Somebody kept leaving dead birds in a coffee can next to it. People are freaking out. I said I'd go back. Mara told me not to bring Nate. He's too excited. You need someone who thinks bad things are boring. This is my sister's logic. If you bring boring energy, the story puts its head back down. I went alone. The cemetery had the orange fencing like a bright plastic necklace, and the men by the backhoe wore vests like traffic. Ruth stood near the gate with a clipboard. We're supposed to be handling this, she said to me before I'd even asked. No one likes the idea, but we also don't like the reports. If we can address it simply, we will. How do you address it simply? I asked. Sometimes stones sink. Sometimes air pockets form. You fill them. You stabilize the ground. She nodded toward the slope. Carver says old slate can splinter with just the right freeze. Does the carver think it's voices? I said, because if we were in a story, that's the role he would play. Ruth smiled without humor. Carver thinks it's weather, she said. I think it doesn't matter what we call it as long as we respect the families and the living. They had set the backhoe bucket down on a strip of plywood to keep it from ripping the grass. A man with black-rimmed glasses stood with his hands in his pockets, willing his presence to be some kind of local television reassurance. 2 more men knelt and brushed dirt away with tools that looked like toothbrushes on sticks. They lifted the stone with a strap like they were moving a sleepy child that might wake angry. Under the stone there was a hollow. It wasn't dramatic. It was a shallow bowl of earth with little tunnels radially around it, like a star with tired arms. The whisper swelled when the stone came off, and I had the sudden idea of a mouth freed. No one said they heard names. Ruth stared at the hollow, and the man with the glasses looked at his shoes. One of the crew made a fist and pressed it into the bowl and lifted it out with a small pop, like pulling a cork. The whisper hiccuped, faltered, then came back thinner. They filled the bowl with a damp mix, sand and soil, and tamped it. They lowered the stone onto a bed of fresh material and pressed, adjusted, pressed again. The whisper went away. Everybody said it out loud, like tugging the tail of the thing to make sure it was dead. It's gone. That's better. There. The man with glasses clapped one of the crew on the shoulder like they'd caulked a window. Ruth put her hand on the slate the way you put your hand on a dog's back to calm it when the mail slot flap springs. We'll monitor, she said. And then something you could call a night happened in the day. A cloud slid. The temperature kissed the ground with a cold lip, and the beech leaves rustled like shirts on a line. The whisper came back softer than before, like someone whispering through a hand. This time it did say a name. It said Ruth's. She lifted her hand as if she'd been stung, then put it back down. The crew pretended to adjust the strap, because that was something they could do. The man with glasses said, well, in a tone that suggested Thanksgiving politics had been mentioned and a joke about pie was imminent. They fenced the stone and posted a paper notice in a plastic sleeve. Maintenance and stabilization in progress. Please do not disturb. That night, the whisper made the local news, and the comments turned into a place where cousins tagged cousins and girls from the high school track team made fun of the boy who had cried when the cattle fence shocked him in sophomore year. A woman I barely knew wrote me to ask if I'd take her niece there as a birthday present, like it was a petting zoo. I didn't reply. The whisper didn't stop. 2 days later, Mrs. Keegan, who works mornings at the diner and wears a brooch for every holiday, told me a woman fainted at the stone, and that when she came to, she said she'd seen a mouth under the grass like a blown-up raft. And we all said that was the kind of thing that happens when you faint. Images like postcards jammed in a brain slot. Nate said the recorder could pick up breath now, that the whisper didn't care about the stone, and he was excited in the way that made my palms itch. Ruth put up another notice, a simple one. Please spend your time with the living. Someone glued a rubber ear to the fence. Someone else glued it back when a kid ripped it off, which felt like a kindness and a curse. I didn't go for a week. I told myself that was respect and not fear. I went to work. I said no worries to emails that deserved no such forgiveness. I lined up my shoes by the door like a person expecting a fire. When I finally went back, it was early morning and the grass was wet to the ankle, and the whisper was still there, but it felt thinner, like a mosquito that knows you've seen it. I bent down and said, "Stop," because that's what you do when a dog whines and you want your voice to be a leash. The whisper pushed and success through my name and then not my name. I stood up fast enough to see spots. Ruth met me at the gate. "They want to pull it," she said. "Remove the stone. There's talk of replacing it with a blank, something poured." She glanced at me. "I don't like it." "Because of history?" I asked. It sounded small. "Because you don't make something quiet by taking away its place to sit," she said. They took the stone 2 days later anyway. There was no ceremony. 2 guys in municipal green lifted it as if moving a grill. They carried it like men who know their bodies. They put it in the truck and it looked suddenly like nothing. The whisper stayed at first at the raw oval where the stone had been, then in the grass around it, then in the ground between it and the next stone over, an old one with a name you had to wet your finger to read. People brought candles. People brought letters like prom corsages. Ruth took them away at night because she said fires should not be near dry grass, and because she didn't like the way people start to worship a thing without thinking about what it wants the first night after they took it. I woke at 3:12 with the cool feeling you get when the power blinks in a storm. The digital clock glowed 3:12 and then stuttered brighter, a pulse. I listened and could hear the building hum the way buildings do, water in the walls, a sigh through some neighbor's window fan. Under that, from the vent, a whisper. If I had never heard the cemetery sound, I might have blamed it on the shape of the vent cover slots or a draft. But I knew. It had the same cheap trick wetness, the same breathy insistence that language could be shaped out of anything, even the ribs of an apartment's lungs. I lay there and tried not to move. My phone beeped. A voicemail, no ring. I picked it up because not picking up felt like someone asking me to prove I was brave. No message, just the length of a call, 12 seconds. The number was mine. I called Mara at 7 a.m. because 3 a.m. is the part of the night when telling people things is a way to make them catch. She answered on the second ring, sounding like a person who has already negotiated with a toddler about whether pancakes require sprinkles. "Tell me it's not about the stone," she said, and I told her it was about my vent. She said, "Is it saying my name?" "It said it once," I admitted. "It said mine twice. Get your landlord to fix your vents," she said. "People die of carbon monoxide." "It's a steam system," I said, then hated myself for knowing that, as if the building had told me its secrets just so I'd excuse them. "It's not that. Then get a white noise machine," she said. "Get 3. Put them in a triangle around your bed," pressing humor like a paper towel against a spill. "I'll come by later with muffins. We'll make the whisper eat carbs." Nate came by before Mara could. He'd left me 3 messages that morning, 5 minutes apart. "Call me. Pick up. Please." That last one was new for him. He didn't like to say please unless he meant it. When he arrived, he had the recorder and a timeline in his head. "We should recreate the sound path," he said. "If it's air moving across irregular openings." "What if it's not?" I asked, and he ignored me gently, like somebody ignoring a toddler's question about whether angels eat pancakes. We put the recorder by the vent. The whisper in the apartment leaned into the microphone like it recognized its old friend. It said my name once. It said Mara's again in that soft R way. Nate kept looking at the thermostat as if numbers could save us. He set the recorder on the windowsill. The whisper tilted to it. He set it in the kitchen by the sink. The drain sang a reply. Mara knocked then with her elbow the way she does when her hands are full. She wore a jacket she'd had since high school, and a new bruise on her wrist where her son had tried to anchor himself to her at daycare drop-off. "I brought Blueberry," she said, and stopped because the whisper said her name in the same tone. Not a shout. An acknowledgement. A nod across a room. Mara looked at Nate, then me, as if we were playing a prank whose rules she couldn't see. "Okay," she said, and put the bag on the counter, and then, because she is not dramatic, she said, "Fine, it's the pipes. I'm a person of pipes." She stood with her hands on the edge of my sink and stared into the drain as if it were a telescope aimed back at us. "Get a plumber," she said. "Get Ruth. Get whoever you need to make it less rude." Ruth came that evening because she had started giving out her number for exactly this. You get to be a pastor in a small town, and the line between spiritual triage and neighborliness is shorter than the line to the coffee shop when the espresso machine breaks. She knocked with the back of her hand and stepped inside like people do when the air tells them their role is caretaker. She listened to the vent. She listened to the drain. She didn't ask if it said her name or mine. She put her palm on the wall just above the baseboard heater, the way she'd put her palm on the stone. "Sometimes attention is a kind of food," she said. "Sometimes it's a leash." She raised her eyes to mine. "Sometimes it's both. Can you do something?" I asked, immediately embarrassed for making her a tool, for making anything into an answer. "I can ask it to stop," she said. "I can ask you to stop listening." She smiled, and the tired in it felt human, not theatrical. In my experience, both work about as well. She stood by the vent and said, "We're not listening right now. We're going to heat the room and talk about lunch, and then we're going to leave for a little while. That's all." She backed away as if from a skittish dog. Then, as if remembering her pastoral script, she added, "Peace be with you." The whisper breathed and then flattened into a hush that still had shape. It was like laying a blanket over a basket with a cat in it. There's a pause and then a settling. We went out for coffee. We walked 3 blocks in coats zipped to the throat, because the wind had turned around and was coming down the hill like it had changed its mind about kindness. Nate talked about phenomena. Mara talked about grocery delivery. Ruth told me about the time she'd had to ask people to stop tying ribbons to a tree by the river, because the knots had begun to cut the bark. "You can love a thing so hard it can't breathe," she said, without saying whether she meant the tree or the dead or me. When we came back, the apartment sounded like all apartments sound when they're trying to be neutral. No whisper. No drain song. We stood in the doorway and tried not to sigh. Nate put the recorder on the counter and said, "It's probably just," and then stopped because the recorder, without being touched, clicked on. The little red light hopped its single-eyed attention toward us. The whisper filled the kitchen. Not loud, not dramatic, familiar. It didn't say my name or Mara's this time. It said the name on the soft-edged stone from the plot next to the hollow where the lamb had been. I will not write it here. It was a name you only hear now when theater kids do a play set in 1910. It said it the way my grandmother might have if she'd been asked to sound it out from a newspaper. Ruth closed her eyes, and I knew that she had heard that name whispered to her already. Not in my apartment, but in her own head, in the place where clergy carry the overflow. We turned off the recorder. It clicked back on. Nate took the batteries out. It died and lay there, small and emptied. A beetle you're sure will move again. We all stood for a minute and then another until it felt silly, and then it didn't. Ruth said, "I think you should bring the stone back." She said it to no one we could see. "You don't have it," I said. "I know," she said. "But if the story has a place to sit, it's less inclined to walk." She looked at me. "In the meantime, stop feeding it." She tapped the recorder. "Stop naming it. Let it be boring," I tried. That week, I put the recorder in a drawer with my extra cables. I kept the television on at night low, a blue ocean of shows where people solved crimes politely. I left for work through the back stairwell so I didn't have to pass Mrs. Keegan fussing with her brooch and the mailboxes doing their community theater of aluminum. I washed my coffee cup as soon as I finished it, the way my mother taught me. I made the bed every day with military corners that pretended to be a net. It helped until it didn't. The whisper learned my routines. It found me in the bathroom in the thin time before my shower heats enough to stop feeling like needles. It found me when the radiator banged like a spoon on a pot. It found me in my car, which should have been neutral. A moving box with 2 coffees in the carrier and crumbs in the seat seam where I told my mother I never ate. It said my name in the vent of the dash, softer when I drove past the cemetery road as if to show me it wasn't stuck there anyway. Nate stopped coming by because I asked him to, and because it worried him to be told no. He still texted sometimes, as if texting was a way to throw a rope. "Any new developments? Any naps?" When I didn't answer, he sent a photo of a dog in a sweater tiny enough to be a glove. Mara came once a week with something baked and the kind of normal that's actually bravery. Ruth called twice and then not again, which I think was her way of not making herself the center of my story. A week after the stone was removed, somebody left a cardboard box on my apartment stoop. It was the size of a small microwave and had "fragile" written on it 3 times in black marker. There was no return address. Inside, wrapped in newspaper that still smelled faintly like ink and fingers, was a slab of slate, heavy enough that I had to set the box down and lift it with both hands. It wasn't the stone, the lamb wasn't there, and neither was the border of triangles, but the slate felt like it had been near the first one, the way cooking smells soak into books. Underneath the slate was a note on lined paper in blocky handwriting. "You can keep it away by giving it something to sit on. Put this on your floor by the vent. It doesn't like to travel where it has to choose." I did not put it by the vent. I carried it to the sink and turned on the water and then turned it off, because it felt wrong to make ceremony out of refusal. I left it on my table and ate cereal, standing up, and told myself that people mail weird things all the time. That there are men who send women crocheted angels and then say they meant nothing by it. That night the whisper came from under the table. It said the soft edge's name once, and then my sister's name twice, and then it said the kind of sigh sound you make when you're disappointed the person you're telling a story to isn't listening right. I slept on the couch with a pillow over my ears like a child. In the morning there was a film of gray dust on the table around the slate where I'd set my palm the night before. There were marks in the dust that could have been from my fingers or could have been letters from someone writing the same word again and again until it no longer meant anything. Brought the slate to Ruth. She took it from me like I was handing over a baby who had fallen, asleep in my arms and might wake if the angle changed. "This is not from us," she said. "Then who?" "Someone who thinks a story is a pet," she said. "Someone who thinks they're feeding a stray without asking whose cat it is." "Whose is it?" I asked. She looked at me, and it wasn't a look where an answer was on the way. "We lost records," she said softly. "There were floods. There were decades when no one thought the names were important enough to keep in more than one place. We have lists, but lists aren't people." "What do I do?" I asked. "Be dull," she said. "Bore it," she smiled a little. "That's harder than it sounds, it is. You don't know how much attention you give to the shape of things until you try to unlearn it. The radiators all talk. The fridge has opinions. The drain chants the alphabet of past meals. I started playing the same podcast on loop, the one where 2 friends talk about houseplants in such detail you can feel the soil texture in your head. When the whisper came through the vent, I'd turn up the podcast and repeat along. "Snake plants will forgive you. Philodendrons will not." When the whisper tried the bathroom light, I washed my hands longer and counted to myself. When it said my name, I said it back like people do when they're learning a language and don't want to give the wrong inflection to the wrong word. Last night, though, after the heat hissed on and the vent said our names after I answered and the vent answered back, my phone buzzed with a voicemail at the same moment the whisper went quiet. It was from Nate. He sounded breathless and embarrassed, like someone calling you from a crowded store and trying to pretend he can hear you. "Hey," he said. "I know you told me to stop. I went up there anyway. I wanted to see if, moving the stone did anything. There's nothing at the site now, just flat ground. Someone left roses. But okay, here's the weird part. I heard it, but not there, under the wall. Like it moved sideways, like what you said. I put the recorder next to the gap and it..." He stopped, and on the recording I could hear something that wasn't the whisper. It was quiet. It sounded like a person putting a finger to their lips. My voicemail ended there, like it had decided that was enough. I called him back, no answer. I called Mara because even if there's nothing to do, she's the person I tell. She answered whispering, which was a cruel coincidence, but she was just trying not to wake her son. "I dreamt last night somebody was in the hall," she said. "They were saying my name like a nurse about to draw blood." "You ever dream like that?" I wanted to lie, but my vent breathed syllables like it was practicing scales, and in the pipe somewhere a drip kept time. "I'm trying not to," I said. "Good," she said. "Keep the world boring." I could hear her husband laughing in the background at something on TV, the sound of a can opening, the sweet, ordinary rudeness of domestic life. "Call me tomorrow. If you hear anything too weird, put on that plant podcast." When we hung up, the apartment felt like a jar someone had opened and closed, the air a different texture than before. The slate on my table made a tiny popping noise like a jar lid settling. I went over and pressed my palm onto it. It was warm. That should not have been surprising. Rooms get warm and things in them get warm too. But slate holds cold the way grief does. It was warm like a forehead. I pulled my hand back. There were faint marks in the dust again. I blew on them and watched them feather away, then come back as if the dust were condensing out of the air itself. I moved the slate to the floor by the vent. I know, I shouldn't have, but I was tired and my brain wanted a lever. I wanted the story to choose a place to sit. The whisper came to the slate the way water finds a low place. It pooled there and made a sound like someone telling you to listen. For a few minutes, I believed I had done something useful. The vent was quiet. The sink was quiet. The radiators held their tongues like good company. I breathed in and out with a metronome in my chest and thought about how to make a life out of cheap miracles. Suppose it simply wants a seat. Then the whisper said my name from the slate and then, soft as a lullaby through a door from the other side of my floor, I dropped to the carpet and pressed my ear to it like a child with a train set. The whisper was in the apartment below me, too, echoing mine like a round in music class. I sat up and pictured my neighbor, the one who leaves his shoes in a little pyramid outside his door and who always says morning, like he's just discovered the word. I pictured him hearing it and not telling anyone because you can live next to a story without ever needing to say you do. I texted Nate. I called him again. I stood in the hallway and listened and heard only the sound of somebody upstairs doing laundry at a time when tired people do laundry, so tomorrow we'll have one less excuse. I came back in and locked the door out of habit. I put a glass upside down over the slate like that would suffocate a metaphor. It fogged quickly and then cleared. When I lifted it, the whisper ticked up a notch like a metronome being cranked. It's going right now. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It says my name sometimes and Mara's sometimes and the soft edges name most often. Like a person humming their own favorite melody under their breath. Every so often it tries a new sound, a new letter, as if learning English late. I've turned the plant podcast up enough that the host threw a little hissy fit about common misconceptions regarding pothos propagation, and I laughed out loud and startled myself by sounding normal. The vent breathed and then paused, and in the pause I realized there was another sound underneath all of it. A faint far-off echo like the big building across the street sometimes gives when the elevator doors open on an empty floor. I think the whisper isn't only in my slate. I think it learned the trick Ruth said it would. Find the places where people listen. Find the places where the air is already moving. Choose a seat. If you want me to tell you how to make it stop, I can't. I did what I was told. I got dull. I turned the volume of my life to a boring hum and tried to love the people I love like a routine that shames the strange. It helps until it doesn't. The heat came on while I was writing this, and the vent said my name, and then it said, soft like a rehearsed line, I'm here. And I said back, like a person practicing being refused, I know. If you live near Larch Hollow, you already know which road to take and which gate to lift off its chain. Don't. If you don't go looking for your own version. This story sits fine without your eyes on it. It's here anyway. It's in the ductwork you're ignoring right now. In the little sigh your freezer makes before it cycles, in the way the stairwell breathes when you open the door. Every time the heat turns on, it learns your name a little better. Every time you say what? To no one, it gets a syllable closer. I'm going to put on a kettle. I'm going to pretend the whistle is only steam and not a voice finding a higher note. If the vent speaks while I'm in the kitchen, I'm not going to answer. If the slate fogs the glass again, I'm not going to lift it. I'm going to let it sit. I'm going to try to make the world around it too boring to bother with. And if you hear it where you are, if it says your name like it's tasting it for the first time, if it says mine, please don't talk back. I think that's what it wants. I think that's how it keeps moving. And I think if I'm very quiet, it might choose a different seat for the night. I used to roll my eyes at stories like this, but I'm at the point where sleep is a negotiation, and noise in an empty room makes my mouth go dry, so here goes. Take it or leave it. If I write it down, maybe it stops replaying. If nothing else, maybe it keeps someone from taking the night shift at a cemetery, because the benefits look decent and the town's quiet. This was in north-central Kansas, a town so small we didn't have a stoplight, just a blinking red that rattled on windy nights. I was 28, broke, and trying to look after my younger sister Molly, who had a habit of picking men like bad lottery numbers. My job search wasn't going well. A guy at church told me the cemetery district needed a night caretaker, part-time, mostly to deter vandals. Gates unlocked at sunrise, cleared trash, checked fences, wrote up anything weird. I don't scare easy, and the pay was better than the diner. I signed on a Thursday. My boss Earl was 64 and could tell you the name on half the stones without looking. He had a sunburned neck and a key ring on his belt that sounded like a wind chime. "You'll hear stories," Earl said the first day, handing me my ring. "You'll see kids with beer and think they're the worst thing in the world. They're not. Be polite, call it in if they won't go. Don't try to be a hero, and if you see a light where it shouldn't be, check your flashlight first." "What kind of light?" I asked, lining up the keys by size like an idiot who thinks he's organized. He was looking at the hill where the cedars cut the wind. "Lantern man," he said like he was reminding himself to pick up milk. He caught my face. "Blue light. Folks say it's a man with a lantern, but it bobbles like it's hung from the end of a stick. Been around since my dad worked this place. I've seen it twice. Here, I'll show you the spots where people talk about it so you don't go tripping over your feet." I laughed because that's what you do when a man older than you is telling you a ghost story and you don't want to be rude. He walked me all over. The veterans' row with flags like stiff little soldiers, the old limestone markers sunk at odd angles, the family plots with benches that were always dusted like someone sat there often. There was a child's grave under an elm, a small granite lamb with the name Lucy and 2 dates 22 months apart in the early 80s. He pointed at that one. "If there's anything to it, it ends there," he said. "But I'd rather it all be a light from the highway and people telling tales because it makes their skin feel alive. You can believe whatever you want." Molly made fun of me when I told her that night. "You and your Scooby-Doo job," she said, lighting a cigarette out the kitchen window and waving the smoke like a conductor. "If you see the boogeyman, tell him he owes me 20. She gave me a hug before I left anyway, the kind she gave when she was worried. "Make noise," she said. Ghosts don't like noise. The first 2 weeks were what you'd expect from a job that mostly consisted of being present. I brought a thermos, a cheap police scanner my uncle gave me, and a paperback with a cracked spine. The shed lights buzzed. The fluorescent tubes were old and flickered in a way that made the corners look like holes. At midnight, the air got cold even in late May, and the prairie wind ran its hands through the cedars so the needles shivered. Every now and then I'd get the hollow pop of a rabbit sprinting under the fence wire, or the clunk of the irrigation pump from the soybean field waking up like a tired animal. I learned the sounds. Gravel under tires, the distant train that never stopped in our town, just whistled and went on. The metal tick of the gate when it swung. If I closed my eyes, I could sort them like coins. People came through. A guy from the high school who wanted to leave a bouquet on his mom's grave, and ended up telling me her meatloaf trick at 2 a.m. A pair of kids who thought drinking Jack Daniels on a bench would make them older. Officer Dugan drove through twice a night and handed me coffee from the gas station, while we traded football takes neither of us meant. He encouraged me to call even for small stuff, said it gave him a reason to drive with his windows down. He'd been here forever. "My dad used to yell at me for stepping on graves when we came out here," he said one night. And the way he said it put a little knot in my chest because I'd been hearing "used to" a lot lately too. Dads and their old rules. Earl worked days mostly. He'd shrug about lights. "You'll know it if you see it." He showed me how to clean a stone without wrecking it, what not to touch if a family asked for privacy, and how to coax the mower to stop belching smoke when it tried to die. He squinted a lot at the sky like he was listening. He never told me directly to keep my radio charged and my phone on me, because he assumed I would. That kind of trust felt like a hand on your back. I didn't want to let him down. Locals talked about the Lantern Man like you talk about a person whose cousin is always starting fights at weddings. Not constant, not everywhere, but part of the town's weather. Ms. Wilkins, who ran the thrift store, asked if I'd met him yet and put an old kerosene lantern on the counter for me. $2, she said, for ambiance. She was all wrists and stories. One of those women who had an opinion about the right way to make everything from pie to apologies. Her husband, who was a quiet man with giant knuckles, never said a word. He worked nights at the grain elevator. I would see his taillights on my brake like 2 red eyes blinking at the far end of the road. I didn't see anything for 2 weeks besides raccoons, kids, and that one coyote that stared at me from the fence line like I owed him rent. Then the weather turned. Kansas does this flip in June where the air gets heavier, but the sky pretends to be made of fragile glass. Storms line up on the horizon and the lightning makes them look close even when they're counties away. Wind was a constant on my shift, but the night this started it was dead. The flags on Veterans Row hung soft. The corn didn't whisper. You could hear your own breath. There's a different silence when a storm is coming. It's like the world is holding something behind its teeth. I felt that around one. The radar on my phone showed a long green finger dragging across the map like someone was about to flick us. I did my rounds anyway, keys jingling, my flashlight hitting the same stones I hit every night. Smith, Ortega, Benson, Lucy, and the metal gate at the back where the farm road comes in. The hinges moaned the way they always did. I told myself I was clever for remembering to oil them tomorrow, like that could anchor me. When I saw the light, I thought it was a reflection from my own flashlight off a plaque or a glass vase. It was blue. Not neon, not bright. It was the color of gas stove flame if you turned it low and cupped your hands around it. It hovered waist-high, 2 rows over from Veterans Row, then drifted into the older section where the stones leaned like tired men. I stood and listened for footsteps. Nothing, no gravel crunch, no breath. Just that low buzz from the shed that suddenly sounded like it was louder than it used to be, because everything else had taken a step back. "Hey," I called out. "Park's closed." I said park out of habit, even though I'd had Earl correct me the first week. "Grounds," he'd said. "This isn't a park." The blue bobbed once, like whoever carried it nodded, then moved. Not fast. Not like someone trying to get away with something. More like a person who knew where they were going and had done it enough to not hurry. I scanned with my flashlight, and I swear I didn't see a body. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it was the angle and the low fog from the humidity. Maybe my brain was trying to make this story more interesting. But the cone of my light fell on stone and grass and then slid off the blue like it couldn't stick. Like the blue was oil and the white light was water. "Hey," I said again, "'cause that's one of those words you can throw like a rope. You can't be in here. I'll walk you out." It moved again, closer to the elms, then cut left down a row I knew by habit even if I couldn't see without turning. I walked faster without deciding to. My boots made a sound that did not feel like it matched the speed I was moving. That's a stupid detail, but it sticks with me. It's what my therapist, okay, 1 session, don't start, calls disassociative markers, which is her fancy way of saying you felt weird. I did. The ground felt like foam. The air felt like a wool sweater. The hair on my arms stuck down, not up. That last part doesn't make sense. I got within, 20 feet? The blue seemed to dim and then swell, like someone was shading it with their hand and then pulling away. It drifted between 2 stones and paused at a small one right against the elm. Lucy, the lamb. I didn't need my flashlight to read it because I'd memorized it. It wasn't a straight line to that grave unless you knew the rows. But whoever was moving that light had walked the right angles like a local. People say fight or flight, but there's also freeze and the more common option of pretend you're in charge. I went with that. I kept my voice steady. "I'm calling this in," I said, already hating how hollow it sounded. "If this is you, Tyler, I'm not laughing. Tyler is the kind of kid who would do this if he could figure out how, and if his uncle had a shop with weird stuff." That's who I pictured then to keep from picturing anything else. The light dimmed. It didn't go out like a flipped switch. It rolled back, blue into nothing, like fog getting thinner. I put my hand out without thinking and felt nothing but wet air. The only sound was my breath and the cicadas starting up late for no good reason. The sky flickered from a far-off strike that never made thunder where I was. I stood there and could taste metal like when you put a battery on your tongue as a kid to see if it still had juice. "Okay," I said, too loud. "Okay," I turned around. All at once I knew I had made a mistake. It wasn't a thought. It was like missing the last stair. The gates were wrong. I wasn't looking at the gates. I couldn't see them from there through the trees. But the same way you know your own front door is locked because you remember the exact sound your key made, and the same way you know you left the stove on because the scrape of your chair was shorter than it should have been. I knew the gates were wrong. The word locked bloomed in my mouth like a seed that had been waiting. I pulled my radio and it was dead. That part is on me. I forgot to switch batteries at midnight. My phone had a bar and emergency calls only, which is a joke the planes like to tell. I started toward the main gate because that's where people would go if they wanted to get out or get in. I walked faster. I jogged. The flags on Veterans Row lifted all at once like some giant thing breathed on them and then fell flat again. The main gate was closed. It was always closed at night. What was wrong was the chain. I locked it from the inside at dusk with a padlock that swung on the inside of the fence like a bracelet. Now it was looped and padlocked on the outside, where I couldn't reach it from inside the grounds. The links were snug. There wasn't enough slack to get a hand through. My first thought was Earl. He could have come by and secured it. But he never did. He trusted me to lock it. And the chain was looped in a way I don't do, twice tight, like someone was binding something on purpose. I stood with my fingers through the cool metal and called out, "Anybody there?" Not help, not a name. Just a neutral thing, no answer. Just that sound you get before a storm when you can't tell if you're hearing wind or your own blood. I went to the back gate because people are dumb like that. You test all the handles. You open and close the same drawer to see if it will make a different sound. The back gate chain was the same, locked from the outside. The farm road beyond it sat empty. I could smell rain that was not here yet. I could have called Dugan, but I had that emergency calls only message staring back at me in a stupid, pressing certainty that if I took my eyes off the chain long enough to dial, I would look back and the chain would be wrong in a different way. I know how that sounds. It's the kind of sentence I hate when other people write it, but it's what I had. Remember when I said noise makes me brave? I banged the gate. The clatter ran across the cemetery like a thrown voice. I yelled, "Hey!" The good rope word, "Hey!" It died on the cedars and came back thin. The blue light didn't show. That would have almost made more sense. It didn't. The storm kept deciding whether to show up. Lightning far away. Thunder you feel more than hear, rolling like a bowling ball under the ground. I told myself 100 practical things. People set chains from the outside with the pull string. Someone could be pranking me from the road. A lock could slip and click shut. None of those things make a chain loop itself twice with the tail tucked under like a neat braid. But I'm not a locksmith, and I wanted a reason that didn't involve telling Earl and having him decide I was the kind of person who made work harder by being dramatic. I went back to the shed for bolt cutters. They should have been on a pegboard over the old coffee maker we never used, because I brought a thermos and Earl drank his black from a chipped mug he washed out in the bathroom sink. The pegboard had an outline of the cutters in marker and a Sharpie label, Cutters 24D, and nothing hanging there. The outline looked a little crooked in the flicker. I checked the drawers, the bottom of the drawer where spare mower blades sit under the rag bin. Nothing. The fluorescent lights hummed in the way that makes your molars feel like they've got bees in them. I stepped out and breathed like I'd come up from under. I thought about climbing. The fence was chain link, 8 feet with a smooth bar at the top because someone had money when they built it. I have climbed worse. I also have a healthy appreciation for how long it takes to climb 8 feet in boots when the air feels like soup. And you're happy your sister told you to make noise because quiet has turned into a hard, small thing in your chest. I backed away from the gate. The chain stayed neat. There are degrees of scared. I'm not ashamed of the first. I'm ashamed of the second. The one where I walked back toward the elm tree because it somehow felt safer in the middle of the grounds than at the edge where the world was. It makes no sense. The center feels like the worst place to stand if you're in a field. But there's something about seeing all the way around you that calms animal parts in the brain. That's my theory now. It wasn't that thought then. It was just feet moving. I stopped by Lucy's stone. The air was warmer there. I didn't notice right away. You notice you're comfortable slower than you notice you're cold. The storm finally made a decision. The first drops tapped on the elm leaves and then on my hat brim. They were big, spaced out like someone testing a microphone. The weird thing was the ground around that little grave stayed dry. My boots kicked dust. The rain fell and made tiny dark spots on my shirt. The dirt at the base of the stone stayed pale, almost powdery, like the first minute of snowfall when the flakes disappear before they stick. I sat on the bench 2 plots over, the Gonzalez bench with its smooth, worn seat and the carved rose that Earl polishes with marble dust on Memorial Day, and told myself a story. That's what you do in the middle of the night when the thing that should not be happening is happening. You talk yourself work. I recited the names I knew. I said them out loud like roll call. The wind picked up for real, flagged the cedars from left to right, and the flags on Veterans Row snapped in a way that felt like they were reminding me of something old. A light flashed to my right, not blue, not lantern, just white lightning without thunder punches. It lit the whole row and for half a second gave everything hard edges. I saw a figure by the gate, tall, long, the kind of shape your eyes make out of whatever is there. I've convinced myself I saw a person. I could give you the exact height and the way his coat hung. That would be a lie. The shape could have been 2 posts and a branch, but my stomach fell in a way it does not usually do for posts and branches. The next flash showed nothing at the gate. The chain was a black line with rain running down it. There are 2 kinds of fear words make worse. The practical kind you can put in a police report, and the other kind, the one you can only tell as a story because it doesn't stay still. I made the mistake of calling it a name. Lantern Man, I said, like you say the name of a friend to get their attention. The blue didn't show. The rain did, thick now. The kind of summer storm that throws itself against tin roofs and turns gravel into paste. I was soaked cold and hot. So was my radio. So was my phone, which finally decided it had service, just enough bars to tease. I called Earl. He picked up on the first ring like he was sitting next to the phone. "You stuck?" He asked. What?" I said. "There's something embarrassing about being caught being scared when all you've said so far is hello." He cleared his throat. "Back gate, loop twice?" I pictured his hand on his mug, his eyes on the window I knew was above his sink. I could hear rain harder where he was. He lived south, where it always seems to rain first. "Don't climb. It's slick. Go to the front. I'll be there in 15. "It's locked too," I said, and hated that my voice went thin on the last word. He was quiet. Then he said, "Stay away from the fence. Go sit with Lucy." I looked at the lamb. The stone looked lighter than it should in the rain. The dirt around it was still dry. I told myself it was because of the elm. "Trees do that, Earl," I said, and stopped because saying the thing makes it real. I saw a light. "Blue?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "It went away at Lucy." He didn't say I told you so. He didn't say anything for a breath. Then, okay, a click and then quiet. He hung up. When I tell you those 10 minutes lasted longer than some entire days of my life, I mean it. I sat with my thermos between my knees like an anchor and watched rain smear the world until the fence didn't look like a fence anymore. The flags made that sound again. I should have gone to the shed for a coat. I didn't want to go inside. The lights in there felt like trapdoors. I don't know why I use that phrase. It was what I felt. A pair of headlights came down the road, bright low, not a truck. A sedan that knew every pothole. I would have known Earl's truck by the way it coughed, but he told me we should have more than one way in and out. And sometimes he took his wife's car because it didn't spook deer on the county road. He stopped by the main gate and got out with a raincoat and a hat that looked like it had been to a lot of picnics. His key ring flashed in the lightning. He didn't see me right away because the rain sheeted between us. When he did, he lifted a hand. Not a wave, a small thing, like you do at a funeral. He worked on the chain for a minute before he said anything to me. I watched his shoulders. He wasn't faking slowness. He wasn't hurrying either. He had the patience of someone who has opened a lot of difficult lids in his life. It felt weird to stay still when he was out there. I walked toward him like a man who is allowed to join the world again. The rain turned my hair into a drain mop and my shirt stuck to my spine. The chain came loose in his hand like any chain. He threaded it through right, padlocked it on the inside, and then took a step back so I could see what he'd done. Like he was teaching me a knot. He turned to me, pushed my shoulder with 2 fingers and said, "Go home." "What?" I said. "My shift." "Go home," he said again, not unkind. "I'll sit the rest." I looked over his shoulder at the elm. The rain was finally hitting the dirt there. It looked dark like everything else. The lamb was wet and didn't shine. There was nothing to see but stones and rain. Earl waited until I moved. He didn't say anything else. He had that key ring in his hand and the lock in his other, like he was ready to tell the gate story a different way, if he had to. I passed Ms. Wilkins's thrift store on the way home. The open sign was off. The kerosene lantern in her front window was not. It had no reason to be on at 2:30 in the morning. But there it was, the soft yellow kind you can fall asleep to if you're a person who sleeps in rocking chairs. It was not blue. I wouldn't have told you if it was. I wanted to tell myself it was not a sign but a light someone forgot to switch off. I didn't go straight home. I drove to the all-night gas station where the guy with facial hair that never grew in right worked. He sold me a coffee and a pack of the chewing gum I use when I used to smoke, and tell myself I don't anymore. He didn't comment on how soaked I was. We both watched the rain run off the awning like beads on a string. He said, "Big one," and I said, "Yep, because that's how men talk here when something's heavy and they don't want to say it is." When I finally walked in the house, Molly was asleep on the couch with the TV on low. Some show where people buy storage lockers and pretend to find treasure. She had an empty bowl of popcorn balanced on her stomach like a small shield. I pulled a blanket over her and the bowl clattered onto the rug. She woke up and batted at me like a kitten. "Make noise," she mumbled, then rolled over. The house creaked twice in a way it always does, and once in a way I'd never heard. I told myself wood swells in the rain. The next day, Earl called at 10. He sounded tired in the way that comes from being awake at times your body says no. Not exhausted. He said he'd cover me for a week. Take a break, he said. Storm season always spooks people. He made it easy to say yes. I wanted to go back because I had pride in a bank account that didn't forgive time off, but I said yes. He hung up after telling me to oil the mower when I came back. I went to Ms. Wilkins's store to drop off that lantern she'd sold me because $2 felt like a lot for a joke that wasn't funny anymore. She saw me come in and said, "Oh, you look like you've been kept up." She took the lantern and put it back on the shelf without ringing it in. "Earl came by," she said, rummaging under the counter for something that turned out to be nothing. "Said you'd had a night. Did he tell you?" I started. She held up a hand. "He said you'd had a night," she said again, soft. I told him, "Tell the boy to make noise." She smiled like she was being kind. "You ever think that maybe the light is just a thing the ground does? Gas, static, earth, breathe out. My husband says that. He says don't make it bigger." "I like your husband," I said. I'd maybe heard 3 words from him ever. She leaned in. "And then I walk the dog up there," she said, voice low like gossip, "and I hear little bells that aren't there." I left without the lantern. It sat there on the shelf, dusty. When I got home, Molly was on the phone laughing at something a person I didn't like had said. She put her hand over the receiver. "You okay?" she mouthed. I nodded because sometimes that's kindness you can give. I went to the kitchen, poured water into the coffee maker I never use because thermos habits are hard to break, and watched it drip into an empty pot because I forgot to put the carafe in. The burner clicked and clicked. I took the week. I told people I had a stomach bug because somehow that was what everyone wanted to hear. The rain kept coming in that on-off way that makes the town smell like wet straw and spilled gas. On day 4, Earl sent a picture to my phone. He doesn't usually do that. It was a photo of a new lock on the pegboard. Cutters, 24 power, and then a second picture of the back gate sitting open in the middle of the day. He wrote, "Wind messed the latch, fixed it." He put a winky face, trying to be 20 years younger for a second. I wanted him to be 90 and certain. On day 7, I went back. The grounds were the same. The elm moved the same careful way. I did my rounds. The scanner popped with static like bacon. I brought a second radio and charged them both. I oiled the mower. I said the names. The first night after my week off, nothing happened. It was a relief that sat heavy, which is its own kind of curse. Your body waits for the thing even when the thing doesn't come. A month went by. Kids came and went. Dugan brought better coffee. He asked me if I'd been sleeping. I said yes, and he nodded like he believed me because that's how men talk here, when they do not want to call each other liars. Earl taught me how to fix a leak in the gas line on the trimmer with tape you have to wrap the right way. He never mentioned the chain again. Sometimes he looked past me like he was counting. And then there was the last part. It was late July, the kind of night where the insects are so loud you feel like you're underwater. The sky had been clear when my shift started. By 1, heat lightning was sketching veins over the horizon. I was at the shed logging a damaged vase. I heard the gate rattles, not the swing. The rattles. You learn the difference. The swing is a well-fed metal thunk. The rattles are a protest, a shake, a hey. I stepped out with my flashlight and went toward the front. The night was that strange bright you get before lightning decides to be real lightning. I saw it from farther away this time. The blue. At first I told myself it was the reflection of the bug zapper I'd put by the shed, except I had turned that off a week ago because I didn't like what it did to the silence. It chopped it up. The blue was at the far end of Veterans Row near the oldest section. It moved without sound. I said, "Hey," because that word still felt like a rope even as it burned my hand. The light paused. It did not bob like someone was breathing. It held steady in a way that made my teeth hurt. "Hey," I said again, softer. My phone buzzed. A text from Molly. "You up?" You know when a message carries how someone is standing? She was in the kitchen by the window. She had a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. Her fingers smelled like the lemon cleaner she likes. I typed, "Working." "You okay?" she wrote. "Yeah." Weird question. "We ever have a lantern?" "Like a camping one, bluish." My thumb froze so hard my joint popped. I stared at the screen and felt the hot cold you get when a fever breaks. I looked up. The blue was closer by 2 stones without having moved. I wrote, "Where are you?" She wrote, "Kitchen." Power just blinked. Thought I saw a light in the backyard. Might be the neighbor. "I'll tell your ghost hi." The flags on Veterans Row lifted again. That's the trick of the wind there. It makes them move in a wave like a thing moving under grass. I said out loud to no one, "Make noise, because sometimes the only thing that can outrun dread is a stupid, useful phrase." I kicked the gravel. I banged my keys on the fence, I yelled. I turned my radio up until feedback squealed. I don't know why I did that, except that it felt like a wall I could build. The blue pulled back a fraction like a shy animal. My phone buzzed again, never mind. "It's gone. I'm fine. Don't be mad. Good night," I called her. It rang twice and went to voicemail. Her recorded voice said, "It's me, say something or don't." And I hate that I smiled a little because that's her. I wanted to drive home. I couldn't, I had never left my post. It was stupid, but it was my only real rule. Earl would have forgiven me. I wouldn't have forgiven me. I stood halfway between Lucy's stone and the main gate until my legs hurt. The blue came within 15 feet and then drifted back, like it was walking a line I couldn't see. It didn't stop at Lucy. It turned once, a slow, careful curve, and went toward the fence along the farm road. For the first time I heard a sound with it. Tapping. Light, not metal. Like glass nudged with a fingernail. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Not a rhythm I knew. When it got to the fence, it didn't go through. It hovered. The tapping stopped. There was a moment, a long one, where the world decided something without telling me what it was. Then the light winked out the way it did before, fading from the edges. The place where it had been was simply dark. Rain started 2 minutes later with no big let-up. It soaked me in 30 seconds. The chain on the back gate was looped the same way it always is on the inside. The chain on the front was too. Nothing was wrong. Nothing had ever been wrong. The next morning I went to Ms. Wilkins to buy back the lantern I'd left. "Oh, it's gone," she said, frowning into the space on the shelf like maybe it would come back if she looked hard enough. "Sold yesterday. Guy with a hat. Didn't say much." She looked up. "You want me to keep an eye out for another?" "Sure," I said. "For ambiance." Earl never asked about the blue again. He taught me how to seal the cracks in the back lot with this tar stuff you heat up and pour. He told me the story of when he was 10 and his granddad put him on a tractor and told him to not be stupid. A story that sounded like a lot of stories here. I kept my shift. I kept showing up. The mower behaved for once and I decided to take that as a favor. Molly says she doesn't remember texting me that night. She laughs when I ask, a real one, the kind with her whole face. "You're the one with the spooky job," she says. I'm the one who leaves the TV on by accident and scares herself with her own reflection in the glass. "You want coffee?" Sometimes late, when the insects are loud and the sky is tired of being hot, I hear tapping on the fence. Not banging. Not someone climbing. Tapping. Like somebody testing a light bulb to see if it's tight in the socket. If I walk toward it, it stops. If I stand still, I can tell myself it's the branch of the elm beating a rhythm in the wind. On clear nights when the stars are blunt and hard, I see a flick of blue in the periphery of my sight, and it's just my eyes being dumb. Like when you see floaters in a white room. I keep the keys arranged by size, even though Earl calls me a magpie for it. I oil the hinges. I sit by Lucy sometimes and read out loud because the bench is comfortable, and the air moves there in a way that makes the noon heat tolerable. I try to remember to switch my radio batteries at midnight. I always check the pegboard for the bolt cutters. They're usually there. I haven't told anyone the part about the gates being locked from the outside that first night, because there's no way to tell it without sounding like I want a story to be more than it is. Maybe someone did it and hid behind the rock pile to watch me sweat. Maybe Earl drove by and decided to teach me a lesson about being prepared. Maybe the chain simply wrapped itself twice because the world has its own ways of tying things. But a week after that second night, when I was walking the Veterans Row with a bucket of small flags, a group of kids had knocked over during a graduation dare. I bent to brush dirt off one and found a little chip of glass in the grass curved like the rim of a jar. It was tinted the faintest blue you've ever seen, so light you wouldn't notice unless you held it against printer paper. I picked it up. I set it on the bench by the Gonzales Rose and went to get a bag so I wouldn't cut my fingers. When I came back, the glass was gone and the bench was wet as if rain had just passed even though the day was clear. It wasn't a trick of light. It wasn't even a good story. It was a small thing the ground did. Or didn't. Hard to say. People ask me if I recommend the job. I say yes if you like quiet and mowing and names. I say no if you like knowing how things end. When the wind has been steady all day and then stops, there's a hush that's different from any other hush. It's the kind of silence you get when somebody is standing just outside your door deciding whether to knock. I hear it sometimes on my porch at home with Molly laughing at a show in the next room, and the dog 2 houses over barking at what is probably nothing. I don't wait for the knock. I go inside. I keep making noise. I tell myself it doesn't matter if I was ever locked in. The gates are fine. The chain is right. The lock is on our side. And if the blue shows up again, if it floats between the stones like someone who has a job to do and is doing it slowly, I'll follow it at a distance. I'll walk where it walks. I'll stop where it stops. And if it goes out at a child's grave or at a fence or at the end of my own driveway, I'll stand there a minute and listen for tapping, for breath that isn't mine, for the sound of a lantern handle settling after a long swing. Then I'll do what I always do when things decide between coming and going. I'll clip the gate. I'll rattle the keys. I'll tell the empty air, grounds are closed, and wait to see who thinks they can lock me in from the other side. I never thought I'd post anything like this, but I can't sleep, and my hands won't stop shaking if I don't put this somewhere. I know how that sounds, the whole "this really happened" preface you see online before a wall of nonsense. But I'm not asking you to do anything with it except read. I want to have it out of me, like letting steam out of a radiator nobody remembered to bleed. Last autumn, my sister Mara and I went to Scotland to clear out our uncle's cottage. He'd retired out there. A little stone box on a road with a name that sounded like a cough, across from an old kirkyard with those tall Celtic crosses. It was the end of tourist season. Empty tour buses sighed through the village like whales exhaling, and every second shop had a handwritten sign about "See you in spring." My friend Nate came along because he drove stick and because he's the sort of person who thinks ruined. Abby's look better in the rain, our uncle's. Place had a door that stuck and windows you had to bully shut. The key made a noise like old teeth. The neighbor, a woman named Isla with a ponytail and a bright yellow raincoat, waved to us over her garden wall and talked about hedges while the wind braided her words into the drizzle. From the garden you could see into the kirkyard, rows of leaning stones, moss like green soot on their faces. There was a floodlight on a timer that snapped on at dusk and washed the whole place flat and theatrical. Inside the cottage was the smell of old books and peat. There were envelopes on the kitchen table in my uncle's cramped block letters, "To keep" and "To sell," and a drawer full of elastic bands, and a mug with a joke about golf. His camera sat on a shelf with a half-used roll of film in it. The only flashy thing in the whole house was a motion sensor light over the front door he'd installed after a break-in a couple winters ago. He'd made notes about it on the back of a grocery receipt. Sensitivity 3.5, don't point at road. On the second day, we went to the little museum by the harbor to ask about someone who could help us sell the nicer furniture. The museum was a single room with glass cases crowded with fishing hooks and clay pipes, and a cracked photograph of a lifeboat crew in rubber coats. It had that polite smell of stored paper. The man behind the desk wore a cardigan and had the kind of face that looks carved by the same knife as the hills. He introduced himself as Ian McEwen. "Not that Ian McEwen," he said, chuckling in a way that made me think he had made that joke every week for 30 years. He wrote down the number of an auction house on a piece of card and told us it would rain by 4, as if he had decided it. When he asked where we were staying and we told him, the old McRae place, across from the kirkyard, he nodded in a way I couldn't read. "You'll keep the light on then," he said. I thought he meant the hallway light. I thought he meant this as hospitality, like, put the kettle on. He was already telling us about the auction house fees and the delivery schedule, and the way he spun the pen in his fingers made a soft ticking like a metronome. That night, the motion light over the front door kept going on for no reason. It was a whitish blue, too cold for the stone. It would snap on, then click off, then on again after a beat, like a heart with extra systoles. We turned the sensitivity down until it took waving your whole arm right under it to trigger, and still it would go on when the lane looked empty. Nate said it was the wind tacking the shrub by the steps, but the shrub was leafless and stiff and barely moved. We picked up 3 bags of hedge cuttings that had blown down from Isla's side and wedged a brick against the gate to keep it from knocking. Mara put a sticky note on the light switch. Leave on. The first strange thing didn't feel strange at the time. It was only later that small things collected themselves into a shape. I was washing mugs after dinner when the kitchen light flickered. For a second, the room went dim enough that the window became a mirror, and I saw what I thought was Mara behind me, walking toward the hall, slender shape at the edge of the frame. When the light steadied, there was nobody there. Mara was outside talking to Nate. The window showed only me and the black of the garden behind me, and the edges of my own reflection looked wrong, too hard, like someone cut out with a blade. We slept in our coats the second night because the radiators were moody. Around 2, I woke up to the click of the motion light and a soft dragging sound outside the door. It was slow velvet on stone. I told myself it was a branch. The hall smelled faintly of the sea, that's all. Through the peephole there was just light flattening the gravel. The gate a black line, the air full of damp. I watched until the bulb timed out and the light blinked to dark. The dark on the other side of the peephole felt deeper than it should have, as if it had weight. I tell you this because that's how it felt to me then, and there's no better word for it. In the morning, Isla asked if our light had been irritated. She said it in a way that made me think she'd chosen the word carefully. They wake up easy, those sensors, she said, trimming deadheads from a plant that looked like it was invented to survive bad winters. Sometimes they see what the rest of us don't. She smiled to take the curse out of it and went back to her clipping. Mara found a manila envelope under a stack of newspapers in the living room, labeled Photos to Sort. Our uncle had never thrown a picture away in his life. There were holiday snaps and landscapes, gray bays, bruised skies. Near the bottom was a set of 4 prints of the kirkyard at dusk, taken from different angles. The last one had a black shape in it. It might have been a smudge from the developing or a trick of the lens flare, but it wasn't anywhere else on the roll. It lay low to the ground, almost flat, the way shadow does when the light comes from the side. But it wasn't cast by anything I could identify. It was like someone had dragged a brush loaded with ink in a long line and it had stuck, thick in the center, thinning to nothing at the edges. Looks like when you get a hair on the scanner, Nate said, squinting. He turned the photo sideways. The shape didn't become anything else. It didn't become a stick or a coat or a dog. Where it crossed a grave's carved letters, the letters seemed to warp around the dark as if trying not to touch it. That last detail bothered me. I told myself it was the way the print lay curled. We decided to go at dusk, purely because we were idiots with nothing better to do and because traveling does this to you. It erases the part of your brain that keeps you on the couch. We told ourselves we were going to take our own pictures and compare them and laugh at the way old film makes ghosts. Before we left, Mara shoved the motion lights manual into a drawer and said, "We're not turning this off, to nobody in particular." On our way out, Ian from the museum saw us and lifted his hand. "You'll want a torch," he said, and went back in to find one without asking what we were doing. He came back with 2, heavy metal ones with rubber bumpers, real tools. "Don't rely on your phones," he added. "They make a puddle instead of a beam." I said something jokey about campfire tales and he smiled without amusement, the pen still ticking in his fingers. The kirkyard is smaller than the picture made it look. The floodlight by the gate threw a perfect triangle onto the gravel path. Everything outside the triangle looked almost solid. The grass was damp enough to make your shoes sink a bit. The crosses were taller than me, thick as fence posts. Midges spun in the beam with that patient insistence flies have. Somewhere a cow coughed. The sky had that flat gray that feels close to your face. We made a game of it, which is how this kind of story starts. Mara went near one cross, I went near another. Nate stood on the mown strip that looped the stones, and we took turns trying to recreate our uncle's angle. We tried with the light, without the light, with the torches aimed down at the path, then up to wash the stones. The first 10 pictures were exactly what you'd expect. Soggy, dull, someone's breath visible in the corner, the edges of a glove. Then Nate said, "What the hell?" in a tone he uses when he doesn't want to sound impressed. On the screen of his digital camera, a long darkness arced across the grass. There wasn't anything casting it that we could see. It was at the edge of the floodlight's triangle, where the light was weakest. When I shone my torch at that exact patch, the shadow jerked like a fish under the surface of a black pond reacting to noise. It was subtle. If I hadn't been staring, I would have told you it was the beam trembling because my hand shook. "Turn it off," Mara said. I didn't, so she did it herself. Her thumb on the rubber switch. The floodlight by the gate hummed and clicked. The edges of the graves went soft. The dark line thickened by a hair, I swear. It didn't move forward like an animal. It didn't lift like smoke. It widened like someone breathing in. We put the light back on. The line narrowed. It was the simplest thing. As if the dark wasn't a void but a creature that preferred pressure, that lived in narrowness. If you widened the light, it had less to be. If you took the light away, it had more places to hide in. "Okay," Nate said, his voice too even. He stepped closer to the gate, and without asking us, he reached up and covered part of the floodlight with his hand, blocking a sliver. The dark on the grass reacted. That is the only word I've got. It reacted. The portion of shadow where his fingers made new dark thickened, stretched toward the path like syrup. He jerked his hand away and the floodlight brightened. The shape didn't go back to exactly where it had been. It had learned the way a trick worked is how it felt. We left. We did the most sensible thing we would do all night, and went home and locked the door and didn't say much while the kettle boiled. I kept touching the torch with the back of my hand, surprised by its warmth. I wanted to call it a game, a photo glitch, anything but something unfolding steadily under our feet. Mara was pale the way she gets when she's trying not to throw up in a car. Nate kept his camera on the table and didn't turn it off, as if he was waiting for it to tell him something. The motion light came on twice while we drank tea. We didn't go look. I'm not proud of the part where we decided to tell someone we'd seen something odd and then acted like cowards while doing it. We went to the pub because it was still open, because talking to strangers under bright lights makes you brave. We brought the camera. We didn't bring the photo from the envelope because even in that moment it felt wrong to carry the past and present in the same pocket. The pub was half full. There was a soccer match on television with the sound low and subtitles marching across faces. We showed the bartender, Sophie according to the receipt, Nate's picture between orders of chips and 2 pints. She squinted and said, "Weird. The way you say it when you've looked at a cloud that decided to be a ship." An older man at the bar leaned in too far, like plant toward light. "That the Kirkyard?" he asked. When we nodded, he put one hand flat on the wood and said, "Keep your light on then," in the exact same cadence Ian had used. He poured himself half a pint from someone else's unfinished glass, and the bartender gently took it away from him and guided him back to his stool like he was a boat. We went home earlier than we meant to. Isla's house was dark. The motion light over our door came on as we approached, and then off and then on again, as if deciding. Inside, the house felt wrong. I would have said it was because we'd been in a bar, and the light in a bar is always warmer than most rooms. This was different. The corners were too shallow. The lamp on the bookshelf made a halo and then an immediate drop-off, as if light couldn't seep properly into the air. Mara went to bed with a book and left it on her chest unopened. Nate sat on the floor with his back to the sofa and thumbed through the photos, not deleting anything, not saying anything. I went around the house like a guard, checking windows. When I got to the hallway and looked down, I saw my own legs thrown long by the lamp behind me, and something between them that wasn't mine, an extra stripe of dark, thinner than a hand, moving slowly along the baseboard as the furnace switched on and the light shifted. I stared until my eyes watered. It didn't run. It didn't flee. It seemed to test the distance between one shadow and the next, like a person putting their toe to a pond in winter. "Guys," I said, but my voice was too dry. When I finally managed what sounded like a voice, they both came and stood behind me, and we watched the strip of dark edge from the doorframe to the coat tree, and then toward the radiator, retreating a little whenever the light brightened, moving forward when the lampshade swayed as someone walked. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a car door shut and startled all three of us. "We can go to a hotel," Mara said. "We can go anywhere." She had her bag in her hand before she'd finished the sentence. Her face wore that simple, hard expression she had at our mother's funeral. What you do when the room begins to leak and you can't stop the water. We didn't get to do that. We got stuck by a dumb thing. There was a power cut at 9:30. It started 2 doors down. A flash in the corner of my eye like someone taking a photo of the back of my head. Then a click as everything in Isla's house went quiet. Then our lights died too. Later Ian would say someone hit a pole with a lorry on the upper road. That's a sentence people have designed to make you think there's no such thing as coincidence. In the same breath that the power went, the motion light outside came on, fed by its own little battery. It threw the narrowest kind of brilliance, the kind that makes very bright and very dark with nothing in between. Mara swore and aimed her phone flashlight at the floor. The circle she made was too small, a puddle like Ian had said. The corridor beyond the phone's ring seemed to thicken. The shape at the baseboard was easy to see now. I wish it hadn't been. It moved the way spilled oil spreads when someone tries to wipe it up, not outward so much as along seams. It used the long line of the skirting board. It used the thin gap under the door. It used the hinge's narrow trickle of dark like a path. We got our torches. Nate found his bifeel in the drawer by the sink. I had mine in my coat, because I am a creature of habit and carry stupid things because I am more comfortable when a plan includes weight. When we clicked both on, the house seemed relieved. I know I'm telling you that as if the house felt things, and I am sorry, but that's how it presented itself to me then. The dark in the hall thinned. The line by the baseboard drew itself in like someone startled by a camera. Then we made another mistake. We opened the door. We told ourselves it would be better to be in the car with the headlights on, to have more light and a way to leave. We forgot about light making shadows on the other side of whatever it touches. The motion light outside turned everything into a paper theater. Our figures threw tall shadows onto the hedges. The gate made a perfect vertical. The gravel had ridges where the rake had been run over it that afternoon. There were too many lines that something could live in. We stepped into the triangle of the floodlight and stood pressed together as if we were children in a second-grade fire drill. The dark beyond the triangle had more presence than night. It was like looking at water from a dry raft and feeling the water look back. I pointed my torch at the gravel and kept it there, and the circle of light made a clean-edged coin in the sea of it. From the corner of my eye, I saw a sliver of dark draw itself along the edge of the coin, as if that rim invited it. I widened the beam. It thinned. It didn't enjoy wide, it liked narrow. "Don't move," Nate said. He said it in a way that told me he was talking to himself more than to us. Mara reached for his sleeve anyway and then froze because her reaching made her shadow long, and the long made everything worse. The gate clicked on its hinges, nothing dramatic, just a light wind lifting and dropping. The hinge made a thin blade of dark when it closed, and in that blade something like a handprint pressed without having fingers. You have no reason to believe me, I understand that, but it did. Headlights came around the curve then like a sentence finishing itself. It was Ian's car. He must have seen the village go out and gone to check on old people. He must have been doing what he always did, steady work. He didn't park. He pulled up at a slow roll and left the beams on us, and they made a wash of brightness that flooded the lane and beaten ground, and sent complicated shadows down the hedge like black lace. For a sick sliver of a second, I thought this would make it worse. It didn't. The light was so complete that the places to hide were fewer than before. The thin things collapsed like veins emptying. "Back in the house," he said through the open window. He said it with the matter-of-factness of a person telling a dog to come off the road. We did what he told us. He came inside too, and he kept his car on. The flood of the headlights through the open door stayed with us like a promise. He didn't ask us what we'd seen. He didn't ask us anything. He went to the kitchen window and looked at the glass the way a mechanic looks at an engine with the hood up. "I'm not going to give you a lecture," he said, finally, because the world does that on its own. He pointed to the torch in my hand. "Keep that on. Don't take your time closing doors. Don't make thin gaps if you can make a big one." He put his flat palm to the door frame and then took it away quickly, like someone testing a stove. "It prefers edges," he said, as if that explained anything at all. When the power came back, the house made one of those sighing noises buildings make, small exhalations from old fridges and clocks. The motion light went off. The regular lamps went on. The world became a place again instead of a map. Ian took one of our 3 torches, mine as it happened, and asked if he could keep it until morning. He didn't say why. When I handed it to him, his fingers were cold. We didn't sleep until light, and even then it was the shallow kind of sleep that has too many waking edges in it. I dreamed about crossing a busy road and every zebra stripe still moving after I stepped off it. We left the next evening. We could have stayed and finished sorting, but it felt like we were leaving in order, the way you leave a church, slow, polite, not turning your back. Isla stood by her gate and waved and said she'd pick up the rest of the post. She did not say, "Keep your light on," and the absence of that phrase felt like a blessing. On the way out of town by the harbor, we saw Ian locking up the museum. He raised one hand and we did the same. He saw the torches on the passenger seat and patted his breast pocket as if checking he had his pen. I wanted to stop and ask him if any of this had words, if anyone else had lists like mine of small things that added up to not small. The light hit the windshield in pieces and made it too easy to keep going. On the plane home, Mara put her head against the window and slept, and Nate watched other people's movies without sound. I sat with the aisle light on because they hadn't turned off the announcements for some reason, and the overhead lights kept snapping to full brightness and back to dull. It occurred to me for the first time then that it wasn't the dark I was afraid of. It was the shape of the dark, the way edges accumulate, the way a shade under a chair could reach a corner if the light swung just so, the way the crack under a door could be a mouth if you stared at it long enough. Back in my apartment, I slept with lamps on for 4 nights. I told myself it was jet lag. My cat ignored the lamps and avoided the strip under the bathroom door with a fastidiousness that seemed new. My hallway has a little motion light I installed because I like not fumbling keys after the grocery run. It began to come on even when I swore I hadn't been the one to trigger it. Sometimes I'd hear a soft plastic click in the middle of the night and the line of light would appear through the bottom of my bedroom door, and then go out, and then come on again a heartbeat later. I opened the door once fast, sudden to catch whatever piece of the world I had put words on. The hall was empty in the way a stage is empty, props quiet, air holding the last of a noise. I called Mara the second week and told her I thought I was being a baby, and could she please tell me something that made sense. She said she'd moved her bed away from the wall just a few inches, because she didn't like how the shadows gathered where the baseboard met the skirting table she used as a nightstand. She said she slept better when the lamp was on the floor pointing up, rather than on the table pointing down. Neither of us called each other crazy. Nate texted a picture of a photo he'd framed from the trip, a ruined abbey, no tricks, and said nothing else. A week later he sent another, of his hallway with 2 cheap nightlights plugged in, one on either side of the corridor like runway markers. The caption said, "Just in case you want a reason, I've turned it over 100 ways. And when I do, I keep arriving at the same thin answer that feels like trying to cut steak with a spoon. If there is something there, it's older than whatever names we give it. We are the ones with new words, and it does not care. If there is nothing there, then I am writing this because my brain decided a line of darkness deserved a story, so it didn't have to be afraid of it. Either way, I can't walk past my closet without feeling the slight tug of a draft at my ankles if the door is open just a crack." A month later, I went to pick up a parcel at the post office. The clerk slid it under the glass with a rubber stamp in her hand. A little strip of sunlight came through the high window and made a bright band across the counter. As she pushed the parcel, it made a low scraping noise and a thin dark moved along the band's edge the way shadow does when a cloud comes over. It could have been absolutely nothing. I can feel you thinking that through your screen. It could have been nothing and I could still be here, writing this with my desk lamp on the floor pointed at the ceiling, with a towel rolled under my door not for drafts but because I sleep easier when the line is gone. 2 weeks ago, a woman up the hall was moving out. New job, she said, tapping a box labeled pans. At 2 a.m, I heard her dragging something long down the corridor. Not heavy, just persistent, as if the fabric of it was touching every square inch of carpet. I opened my door a sliver and saw nothing. The hall was a tunnel of dark toward the exit signs green. The motion light clicked on, and the moment it did, I saw the thinnest slip of darker dark under the neighbor's door retreat like a thought you're not ready to have. The motion light went off. I closed my door. I told myself it was a trick of tiredness and the exit sign. I told myself a lot of things, and then I got up and put my lamp back on the floor and propped the door open with a laundry basket so there wouldn't be a line. Tonight the hallway light has clicked, on 4 times while I've been writing this. The lamp by my knee makes my room a big glow instead of a little one. I've rolled a blanket into the draft under the door and set shoes in the corner to break up the place where the wardrobe meets the floor. My cat has taken to sleeping in the circle of the lamp like a campfire he trusts. The building across from mine has a window that never goes dark. Someone with a fish tank, I think, a blue rectangle through the night. It's amazing how much safety you can borrow from other people's bad habits. There's no chase scene to give you, no cops to tell you they can't help with that, no priest to refuse a blessing on a technicality. The only policeman in this story is a local constable who showed up when a car took out a pole and stood in the rain with a torch while another man in a cardigan checked on old people. The closest thing to a villain is a line under a door that sometimes looks thicker than it should be. When I close my eyes, I think of the way the floodlight on the kirkyard cut the world into a triangle and left the rest to be negotiated by whatever prefers to live in edges. When I open them, I look at the line where the hallway meets my bedroom and wait for the motion light to click again, as if waiting is a power all by itself. I don't care whether any of this fits with what you've seen or believe. I'm telling you, I have moved my furniture and changed my light bulbs and learned to avoid making narrow beams if I can help it. The torches we brought home from Scotland live by my door, 2 of them. Not because I think I'll have to run outside, but because I like the weight of them in my hand. I keep them both on side by side when I need to cross the room after I've turned the lamp off, and the twin circles make a wide enough river of light that the dark has fewer places to practice its tricks. It makes me feel foolish. It makes me feel safe. If you're looking for an ending, here it is. A few minutes ago, there was a knock at my door, soft and polite. The way neighbors knock when they need a cup of sugar and don't want to wake you. I didn't answer because it is after midnight and because I didn't hear footsteps afterward. Only the low shush of air under the door, as if someone sat down on the other side to wait. The motion light in the hall clicked on by itself and then off and then on. The light from the gap under the door made a bright band across the floor, and at its edge there was the barest idea of a line, thinner than a thread, that drew itself along a fraction and then stopped the moment I breathed. It didn't push forward. It didn't disappear. It became a part of the floor for a while, and then the light went off, and the room felt heavier by the tiniest measure, and I realized I was holding my breath the way you do when you think someone is outside and you don't want them to hear you. And I am still sitting very still in the chair, and I am typing this so I don't have to look again at the place where the shadow under the door isn't any thicker than it was a moment ago, and isn't any thinner either. I'm not the type to post, but the heat's not letting me sleep and my hands won't stop shaking, so I'm just going to spill this and leave it up. Believe it or don't, I need it outside my head. I'm a 29-year-old guy, born and raised in Savannah, and I work nights as a part-time tour guide when the tourists pile in for ghost season. It pays the rent and keeps my student loans barely breathing. If you've done one of those walking tours where someone in a black polo points at old brick and talks about yellow fever burials and Spanish moss that isn't Spanish and isn't moss, you've seen me or one of the guys like me. We do the stories with a smile. We point up to the iron balconies. We shine flashlights on plaques, and we learn fast which alleys not to cut down when the bars let out. That's the surface. What I'm writing about is underneath all that. The thing they left out when they trained me at the big office off Bay Street and told us to lean into the fun creepy. I didn't hear the first scream. My sister did. Her name is Dana, 2 years older than me. The kind of person who keeps 3 tidy to-do lists going at once and still remembers when I had braces. She'd come down from Atlanta for a weekend, got sunburned in a single hour by the fountain in Forsyth Park, and decided she wanted the real Savannah experience. That meant my tour. I told her I could squeeze her into the late 8 o'clock group if she promised not to heckle me. She promised, then heckled me anyway, but in that sister way that reads like encouragement from a distance. We had a decent crowd, a Canadian couple in linen, a bachelor party already regretting themselves, an older guy named Mr. Harlan who tried to fact-check me after every stop, and a pair of college kids who said they were staying at an Airbnb with personality, which is local code for one window AC unit and the smell of someone else's fryer oil. My friend Malik, who covers the 9:30 tours, walked by when we started, tapped his watch and mouthed, "Don't go long," like I ever do. Malik and I started around the same time. He's the kind of steady presence you don't notice until you need it. His grandmother goes to a church near Oglethorpe Avenue, the one with the above-ground crypt. The Screaming Vault, people call it. Usually the way you'd call a friend crazy when you mean fun. I'd told that story a dozen times. How in summer you could hear someone wailing inside when the air got heavy, how the church sealed it once and it rattled the stone, and how when they reopened it the coffins were gone and the walls were clawed to grooves. Every tour wants to hear it. The company tells us to gear it down, but the reviews get better when people feel like they're getting away with something. That night was August thick. Gnats in your eyes, your shirt sticking to your back. The kind of warmth that feels like someone leaning on you. We did the usual stops. The square where the bench from the movie used to be. The inn with the stairwell that smells like bread. the narrow lane with the brick that sweats. My sister kept walking on the curb like she was 8 again, balancing in sandals like she could trust the city not to tip. When we reached the churchyard, I gave my speech in the light of one of those sodium street lamps that makes everything look jaundiced. People always get a little quieter there because the houses around it are set back and old live oaks lean in with that lace of Spanish moss drooping like old curtains. And even the cicadas sound like they're listening. I did my bit. Yellow fever, above-ground burials because of the water table, the famous vault nobody wants to claim, the rumor that when the church sealed it, the stone bulged. I point, I pause, I let the quiet fill in. Dana rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. And then she stopped smiling and cocked her head. And I saw the Canadian woman do the same thing. And then the bachelor party guys shut up mid-whisper. And I realized it wasn't quiet anymore. It was a sound, not a scream first. More like someone caught behind a door that won't give. This low, urgent, breathy sound half heard. Like your upstairs neighbor dragging furniture. Then sharp, an exhale that broke into a sob. It wasn't loud like in the stories. It was more awful for being small. Like whoever was making it had learned not to make noise in case nobody came. The kind of noise you make to keep yourself from drowning. I didn't know what to do with my face. You get good at managing your own reactions in this job. You see people cry sometimes because something about a story hits a memory they brought with them. And you make an open expression, and you tuck them back into the group. But the sound made me think of something trapped. And even thinking that felt corny until my brain said, through the humidity and the lamplight, someone is in there, not a ghost, a person. I told you, Mr. Harlan said, like the thing in his head needed to be right more than loud. We all stood looking at the rectangular white vault with the little stone door like a cutout. You've probably seen one, 4 feet high, wide enough for a child to lie on. A row of them against a churchyard wall, painted a white that always dries chalky. They lined them up like teeth. The vault had that look. The white chalky paint, a crack along the top edge, a soft slump to the earth near its base that said the ground had shifted more than once. The door looked sealed. There was no handle, just a mortared seam that had been painted over a few times. Next to it, a metal sign pitted by the salt air said the usual, "Sacred ground, no climbing." The noise came again, closer to a sob, and I swear I felt it vibrate up my shoes. "Call someone," the Canadian woman whispered, but I saw in her face that she didn't know if she wanted me to. Dana had her phone out already, light on, scanning the seams like she could find a switch. She turned to me and her eyes were too bright. "Wyatt," she said, my name in full syllables. "Do something." I walked up to the door like I was going to knock, then felt absurd, then did it anyway, palm flat. Warm stone, a faint vibration, like a dryer 2 floors down. It's tough to explain, but my hand wanted to pull away the way your hand wants to pull back from a sleeping dog when it twitches. I knelt, feeling my jeans pull at my knees, and pressed my ear to the seam. The stone smelled like limestone dust and old soap. There was a sound in there that wasn't moving air. Not words, a throat-pulling sound into itself, catching on something like a cough you try to swallow. "Sir," I said, because that's the tone you use when you want to be heard by someone who might be in trouble or trouble themselves. "If you can hear me, we're calling the police." I could feel the group behind me angle their phones like a bouquet of artificial moons. The noise paused, and then it said, I'm not exaggerating, clear as if it had put its mouth right against the seam, "Don't open." Not loud. Not desperate. A statement. I flinched so hard I scraped my cheek over the chalky paint and felt dust travel into my eye. I stood up then because my body had made the decision for me. "Okay," I said to the air, to the group, to someone. "We'll wait for the officer." One of the bachelor guys did a half laugh that died in his throat. Mr. Harlan said, "Well," and then let that sentence starve. The Canadians held hands. A car passed on the street beyond the hedge, very ordinary. The soft shush of tires in summer dusk. The police came faster than I thought they would. I think the dispatcher likes to send cars to the tourist zones quick. The city hates bad press. 2 officers showed up. A woman with her hair in a tight bun and a very young man who kept resting his hand on his belt like it steadied him. They kept their voices low. The way you keep your voice low in a room with a sleeping child. The female officer's name was Clayton. She introduced herself and looked me up and down like I was a person for a minute. Not a performer or a problem. "What's going on?" she asked. I told her very straight, with no flourishes because suddenly all the flourishes felt like lies. She nodded and said, We've had calls about this before. That sentence sat between us like a third presence. She put her ear to the seam and then stepped back, and something changed in her face that wasn't fear exactly, more like recognition of a headache she'd had before. They didn't break the seal. Officer Clayton made a call to somebody who had a key to the gate on the far side of the yard. Not because she wanted to open the vault, but because she wanted to make sure nobody had got in some other way. The young officer walked the perimeter with a flashlight that cut a bright cone out of gnats. The noise went on in pulses, the half-breath, the backing away sound, a wet swallow like trying not to cry. When it spoke again, if that's the word, it was just a wordless movement of air that felt like a voice behind a hand. Dana was standing very still beside me. I reached for her elbow and she didn't shrug me off, which is how I knew she was really scared. Eventually, they cleared us out. Officer Clayton said the yard would be closed for the night, and that we should finish our tour elsewhere. I said that was fine. People didn't complain. They practically trotted. On the way out, the Canadian woman said, "Is it the pipes?" And I told her I didn't know. She looked like she wanted it to be pipes more than anything she'd ever wanted. Back at the office, I filled out an incident report while the fan turned the room's one air bubble over and over. Malik showed up 10 minutes after I did, which meant he'd heard and cut his tour short. He leaned on the desk with his forearms and said, "Tell me everything." I did. He didn't make jokes, which was alarming. "My grandma told me not to mess with that yard," he said. Her church tried it all. Ceiling, prayers, that fella with the stethoscope. You know what they found once when they opened it? Nothing, not even a spider. Just the grooves. He traced parallel lines on the desk with his finger, like someone in there wanted to make their own door and kept forgetting how. I went home with my brain buzzing like a dying light. My apartment is on the second floor of a skinny house off Habersham, the kind with a porch you can touch your neighbor's porch from if you lean, and a back stair that will kill me when I'm old. I sat on the couch without turning the TV on. Dana texted me from her Airbnb. "Are you okay?" I lied, "I'm fine. Try to sleep." She sent back a thumbs up she didn't mean. For 3 nights I slept, or thought I did, because that's what the clock said when morning came. In those 3 nights I dreamed I was in the yard again, but scaled down. The vault a refrigerator. Me a child with my ear against it while somebody behind it breathed in the shape of my name. Malik said to take a night off, but I didn't. I'd rather be walking and talking than alone. The tours didn't go near the yard because the gate was closed with a chain. The chain had a new padlock. Officer Clayton nodded to me from her car when I passed. She looked tired the way people look when they've had the same conversation too many times. On the 4th night, my sister came on the tour again. She's like that. She said she needed to see me around other people, make sure I could still do the patter. We finished near the river, by the old cotton exchange with its carved stone face. The wind coming off the water felt like a cheat code after the week we'd had. People walked to their cars or to the ice cream place with the line out the door. Dana stayed behind. "Let's just walk a block," she said, casual as possible. And the block we walked was nowhere until it was the corner near the churchyard with the chain and the new lock. The light cut the hedge into silver tops and black depths. The street was quiet. A cat moved along the top of a wall like liquid. I didn't want to go closer. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding like I was pretending. So I said, "Let's not." Dana, who has always hated being told no without a door number 2, said, "Then we'll stand here." We stood. The cicadas did their rattling orchestra. Somewhere a TV was playing a game show with the volume up just enough to hear the rising questions. I told Dana about Malik's grandma and the man with the stethoscope. She told me about a customer at her job who cried because the color of a blouse matched her daughter's prom dress from 20 years ago. We talked like that for a while, and then the sound started. It didn't come from the vault this time. Or rather, if it did, it bent itself around the hedge and came to us thinner and sharper like the shadow of a scream. I had a thought that didn't fit in my head all at once. That the vault wasn't the source but the mouth, and whatever was speaking was standing somewhere else, and the vault made it sound like stone. I know how that sounds. The best I can do is tell you what I felt. The kind of recognition you have when a smell tells you you're in your grandmother's kitchen even when you're not. The sound felt like in there, and it also felt like it knew where we were. Dana squeezed my arm. "Wyatt," she said, and I said, "I know." We stood like that too long, and then a car came, and we did that thing people do where you pretend you were already moving because the car's presence exposed your stillness as weird. We went home separately. I didn't sleep. I listened to my fan and to the wild idea assembling its own scaffolding in the middle of my room like a stage set. Go back. Go back with a recorder. Not because you'll find anything supernatural. Because you have to find anything ordinary, you have to let the cough be the pipes, so I did. 2 nights later, because waiting made it feel like a decision instead of a panic. I told Dana what I wanted to do and she said, "I'm coming," before I got to ask. I told Malik because I needed one sane person in the room. He said, "I'm not missing out on being the one who says let's not when this goes left." We met at midnight with headlamps and the kind of snacks you buy when you don't want to be honest about your intentions. Pretzels, a bottle of orange Gatorade, 2 peppermint patties from the bottom of Dana's purse. I borrowed a digital audio recorder from the office, the kind we use when managers want us to practice our talking beats. It's a decent little thing with a red light that looks like an eye when it's on. The chain was still on the gate, but the hedge on the far side has a place where the branches are thin and you can wiggle if you're stubborn. Malik said, "No." And then he went first because he knew I would if he didn't. Inside, the yard was quieter than I expected. Isn't that always the way? The city sounds drop to a hum and you're left with the noise of yourself. Breath, foot scuff, the little huff of fabric against your ribs. The vault was at the end of a row like a period. Up close at night, its white paint looked gray, the chalky surface giving back no light. I put the recorder on top, a little metal bug, and sat on the low curb of the path with my hands on my knees. Malik leaned on a headstone, bowing his head like a man at a funeral, which felt wrong even as it felt right. Dana stood beside me, then sat without asking, her shoulder warm against mine. We waited like you do at a doctor's office when the nurse says, "Someone will be with you." The recorder picked up 27 minutes of nothing. We know because we listened to it later with our ears closed, the way kids listen to shells. The air was thick. I could hear, faint, cars blocks away and the singular clunk of a reset on a traffic light. I could hear my own swallow. At minute 28, I stood up to stretch my legs and the recorder turned its little red eye off without me touching it. I tapped it and it came back on, then off, then on. It did that twice and then stayed on like it had made up its mind. I looked at Malik and he had his eyebrows high in that way he does when he's saying with his face, "I'm not going to say it." Dana said, "Battery?" And I said, "It's charged." I almost said I charged it myself like you would to someone who thinks you forgot. And then the vault exhaled. That's the closest word I have for it. Like opening a room that's been closed a long time and the temperature exchanges itself with the hallway. Not cold, just other. The red light on the recorder dimmed as if the exhale had pressed on it. I pressed my palm to the seam because I couldn't help myself. I felt the faintest tremor, like when a truck passes on a far street and you notice it because your coffee ripples. And then a voice, not a scream yet. A woman's voice, calm with the kind of calm that's made of decisions, said, "It's not for you." I closed my fingers on the seam so hard chalk came off under my nails. We didn't run. We did something stranger, we talked to it. Or rather, Dana did. She said, "Who is it for?" Like she was on a conference call and needed a name for the minutes. Silence. Malik shifted his foot on the stones and I could hear the dry grit grind. We waited. Then the voice said, so soft the recorder barely caught it even later when we turned the volume up and up until our own breaths sounded like storms. The impatient. I don't know why that made my neck go hot. Maybe because it wasn't dramatic. It was a word your grandmother would use to scold you. It made me feel 9 again with a hand on my shoulder pinning me to the place I'd misjudged. Malik said, okay. He didn't like it either. He said, "We're going to go now," in an announcer tone he uses with drunk guys who wander onto his tour. He was addressing trouble like trouble could understand. He reached for the recorder. The red light went out. When he touched it, it was warm. He picked it up and shook it gently, the way you move a remote when the batteries might have bumped. The scream came after that. It's almost worse to call it that because it wasn't the movie kind. The microphone in the throat, the theater-pleasing rise. It was someone in the next room breathing in and then letting go of the breath in one long, raw line until they had to inhale again. No throat tearing, no words. Just air pushed hard over the sound of a body that didn't want to. Dana made a noise I have never heard her make, and I realized I was on my feet without knowing I'd stood. The scream didn't stop, it bent. It wavered in pitch like whoever was making it had turned their head while doing it. It sounded so human I thought we'd open the vault and find someone with a mouth and a life and a reason. And then it did something I can't explain with my mouth. It thinned like a filament and lifted in tone. And in that thin lift I heard a sound I knew exactly. The creak of the back step at our mother's house when we'd sneak out after curfew. It threaded through the scream like a detail in a painting and pulled my brain sideways. It did what good horror does. It made the ordinary complicity of my own life complicit. "Stop," Malik said, and his voice broke the way people's voices do when they're trying not to cry. He put his palm on the seam like I had. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and I don't know who he was apologizing to. The scream cut off. The silence after was a shape. I could hear my heart like a boot in mud. After a beat, too cleanly, too politely, the voice said, "Not for you." Like it had returned to its earlier thought and completed the sentence. We left. I would like to tell you we left in some cool, organized way. We did not. We skittered. Malik swore once, a word he'd never say around his grandmother. Dana grabbed my sleeve like she thought I'd fall and pulled me, which kept me from looking back. Back at the hedge, Malik went over first again and did that thing where you put out your hand for the person behind you without looking. And Dana squeezed through with her purse held over her head like rain. And I scraped my shin on something and didn't feel it until later. We didn't run down the street because running would have made us ridiculous in our own bodies. But we did walk too fast like people in a commercial. At the corner, near the lamp with the fix someone hammered in years ago that makes it buzz in the wrong register, we stopped. We were 3 people in a very normal city, with neatly kept sidewalks and a sign for a farmer's market on Saturday. We were sweating through our clothes. Malik held up the recorder. The red light was off. He pressed play. It made that click recorders make when they commit to playing. He hit buttons like an exorcist flicking beads. Nothing. "Maybe it'll read in the office," Dana said, and her voice was good at problem solving again because she made it be. We walked to the office and let ourselves in with the key that sticks. The office AC unit, ancient and loud, beat and beat at the air. We plugged the recorder into the computer with a cable that had teeth marks in it, where someone had used their mouth to pry it out once. The computer recognized it. A little folder icon popped up. Files dates, the one we'd just made, time-stamped 12:34 to 1:03. It had size. It was there. We clicked. We listened to ourselves breathing for 27 minutes, and then, at minute 28, the sound changed. Not the exhale, not the voice. A soft click like the recorder's internal battery switching rails, even though it was on external power. Then a high noise you make in your throat when you're about to cry and you don't. Then nothing, not like the quiet of a room. A noisy kind of nothing. The sound a file makes when it's intact but just blank. We scrubbed. We turned the volume up until the fan on the computer bracketed the room with its opinion. Nothing. And then, at the very end, a half second of something, like a fingernail dragged over fabric. We played that half second until the speakers distorted. It could have been anything. It sounded stupidly like my kitchen chair being scooted back from the table, which was unfair because that is a sound that belongs to morning, to coffee, to daylight rectangles on the floor. It felt like a small invasion, a scout from a larger army. We left the office because it felt crowded with the computer, the recorder, our own breathing. On the sidewalk, Malik put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it in a way that said, "We're okay," and also, "We are not okay." He said, "Don't go back." He said, "My grandmother will pray for you whether you ask or not." He said, "I mean it," with a little laugh that wasn't a laugh. Dana hugged me with her whole body, which she only does when our mother's not watching. Then she went back to her Airbnb because she wanted to be around people who weren't intimately tied to my dumb idea. Malik went home to the apartment with the plant he never remembers to water. I went to mine. I'll do this part quick because I think I'm writing to get to it. I unlocked my door and stepped inside and knew without knowing why that something was off by a degree. Not someone was here. More like when someone you love has moved a picture frame a half inch and you can't say why it's wrong, but it is. My kitchen chair was pulled slightly out from the table. Not a lot. The way you'd do it if you reached lazily for the sugar. It could have been me in the morning or the afternoon. I tried to remember. I couldn't. I told myself I had. I pushed it back under. It made that small leather foot noise over the vinyl like the end of the file. I didn't sleep, Every sound in the building mapped itself to some fear. The upstairs neighbor's baby did that hiccup in sleep thing, and my brain called it breathing behind stone. At 5:30, a truck rumbled past, and my brain called it the vault settling itself. When light started to ink the edges of the blinds, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number with a local area code. It said, "This is Officer Clayton. Everything okay?" My first thought was how many times a night she must send that to strangers. My second was that she'd known what to ask. I thumbed back, "Fine now, thanks," and then I wasn't fine because I'd lied, and that felt like giving something permission. If you name it, my grandmother used to say, you invite it. I'd named nothing, and here I am typing to name it a little. If that was the end, it would be annoying. A person says they heard a thing. They went to a place they shouldn't. They heard it again. They failed to record it because of course they did. Their kitchen chair moved and they're tired. But there's one more piece, and it's why I'm posting. 2 days after we listened in the office, I got a call from the tour company manager. He's the anxious type who worries about Yelp like it's a weather pattern. He said we had someone come by with a complaint, and my stomach did that drop where you imagine refunds like hailstones. He read me the message in a careful voice. The tour guide was fine, he read, but he shouldn't talk about that vault like it's a game. Some of us live near there, some of us hear it, and it keeps us up. Tell your boys to take it off the route. He paused. And at the bottom, he said, tone changing, there's a note. Tell Wyatt it's not for him. He coughed. I didn't give them your name, by the way. I don't know how well, we'll just keep a block between you and that place for now. Fun spooky elsewhere, yeah? I said sure. I said absolutely. I hung up and stared at the wall where the paint is a little rough from an old repair. The chair was under the table where I'd pushed it. A little line of white chalk under my fingernails still caught the light where I'd missed it washing my hands. I rubbed it off with my thumb and watched it dust my skin. Later, when Malik came by after his shift with 2 tall lemonades and a serious face, he stood in my kitchen and looked at the chair and then at me and said, if it's not for you, who is it for? He asked it like he wanted the grammar to save us. I said, the impatient, and he said, I'm not impatient. He put the lemonade on the table. We stood a long time without sitting. It felt like a dare to pull the chair out. It's been a week. The churchyard gate is open again in the daytime. People walk by with strollers and forget to look. At night, the chain is on and the lock is new, but the metal sign is the same. I've heard the sound twice on my route at a distance, not during a tour, but on my way home on a shortcut I didn't need to take. It rides the air like a thread, and you could cut it by crossing the street, only I don't. Not always, and I don't know why. Last night, my upstairs neighbor left a note on the front door with painter's tape. Did you hear that? Was all it said. Underneath, in someone else's pen, yup, again. Then a little smiley face somebody thought made it neighborly. I folded the note and put it in the drawer with my batteries and the rubber bands no one ever uses. I told myself I'll throw it away when the trash goes out, and I probably won't. Here is the last thing, and then I'll stop. This morning, after not sleeping, I took the recorder out of my backpack and clicked it on, intending to delete the blank file and get rid of the timing of it in my head. A new file had appeared overnight, time-stamped a minute after I locked my door last night. I did not record anything. I did not even touch it. The file is 43 seconds long. If you play it, you get the soft hum of my refrigerator and the distant transformer buzz of the street lamp outside. At second 23, a chair moves. At second 26, the click of the plastic of the recorder as if a thumb pressed the button. Only the red light never came on. At second 30, a voice, quiet as breathing and as certain as a sign, says, I'll wait. Then the file ends. No scream, no drama. Just the feeling, bright as the line of chalk I keep finding under my nails no matter how long I run water over my hands, that the measure of my patience is being taken. I'm not going back to the yard. I believe people when they say to leave it be. I'm saying this here so it exists somewhere besides my head. And so maybe if you decide you need to cut through Oglethorpe at night and you feel a thread tug at you like a low note on a cello, you'll cross the street instead. If you do go closer, don't knock. And if you hear it called, don't rush even inside your own mind. Stand still, count. Let the cicadas finish their sentence. Let the lamp finish its buzz. Let your neighbor move their chair upstairs. Let your name be your name in your own mouth. It told me something that evening, but I only heard it on the recording later. In the half second before the nothing. It said something like a rule you could pin to a church bulletin. I keep trying not to make it my life. It isn't the scream that gets you. It's how quickly you answer. If you're from here, you'll know the place. The walls look rough because fingers made them that way. People say the coffin's vanished and call it a legend. Maybe nothing's missing at all. Maybe it's us. When I sit at my table now, sometimes the chair moves a quarter inch without me noticing, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes the drawer with the rubber bands is just a drawer and not a mouth. If you hear a noise tonight that belongs in one part of your life and lives in another, don't be impatient. That's what I'm telling myself anyway. The vault has time. It's summer again and the air is heavy, and there's a sound under my fan picking through the different textures of moving air as if trying to find mine. I'm not opening the door. I'm here with all the lights on, watching the chalk dust spin in it, and I'm not answering as quickly as I did before. But it's waiting, and I think it hears me trying not to move. I've typed and deleted this a dozen times, but I think saying it is the only way I'll sleep again. If you live anywhere near central Pennsylvania, and you've walked past a cemetery after rain, you might already have heard the nickname people use, the grave that bled. Folks make jokes about clay runoff and iron in the soil. That's safer than admitting what it looks like when it pools under your shoes, soaking into the cuffs of your jeans with that copper smell. I told myself all of that too. Then I watched. It happened up close, and I can't keep pretending it was just mud. I live 2 towns over from the cemetery I'm talking about. It's the one behind the Methodist church with the slate roof and the old bell that rings too loud for the size of the place. I grew up here. The gravestones are older than my house, older than the wet maples that lean over the fence and dump helicopter seeds into everybody's gutters. On the night that started this, an early fall storm came out of nowhere. Not a dramatic one like on the news, just a steady, stubborn wall of rain. The next afternoon, during a brief patch of gray light, my brother Alex called and asked if I wanted to help him check on the church. He does odd jobs for the pastor sometimes, and he didn't want to be stuck bailing out a basement alone. He offered to buy coffee after. I said yes because it sounded like something simple, something normal. It was one of those afternoons where sound feels heavy. Tires hissing, the whisper of rain on dead leaves, a backhoe somewhere far away growling like a huge cat. When we pulled into the church lot in Alex's truck, the wipers were squeaking that dry pattern they do right before the rain decides to start up again. The bell tower had a new dark streak under one of the louvers. The pastor, Reverend Ames, met us at the side door, hair wet and stuck to his forehead, keys jingling too loud in his hand. "Basement's fine," he said, breathing in through his nose like he'd been running. "But we've got a mess out back." We followed him down the hall that always smells like lemon cleaner and old paperbacks, then out into the cemetery. There's a narrow asphalt path that loops from the back door to the far fence and back again. You can walk it in 10 minutes and read 100 names. 2 Civil War markers with flags, 5 headstones with lambs carved on top, a black marble one for a young woman who died while studying abroad. Students leave foreign coins on it sometimes. We heard the mess before we saw it. A splintered oak groaned on its side like something trying to get up. The trunk had sheared off a few feet above the ground, splinter pointing like a wooden spear at the sky. It had crashed through a line of old stones and stopped with its topmost branches tangled in the fence. A groundskeeper named Piotrowski was already there. We all call him Mr. P because the kids can't say his last name. He had his chainsaw on the gravel and a rain jacket hanging off one shoulder. There was sawdust in his beard. He pointed at the hole where the stump had lifted out of the ground, and then he pointed at the crater where the trunk had slammed down. I stepped closer, and my first stupid thought was that the soil looked bruised. It wasn't just wet. Water had been forced up with the roots and spilled down into the crater, mixing with something dark that didn't look like mud. It came up from the crushed area where a headstone had been broken into 3 chalky pieces. On one of the shards you could still read a name, Dr. Fletcher. Then the rest of it smeared where it had fractured. Alex put his hand on my shoulder like he was bracing me for a punch. We both stared at the pooling liquid. It had a sheen on it, and it was thick. Not paint, not clay. I remember the smell most of all. It's funny how every person describes it the same way, and it still feels like you're the first one to notice it. Hot metal, pennies on your tongue. I swallowed and tasted it. "Don't touch it," Mr. P said, "Don't step in it." His voice sounded like it came from far away. "It's runoff," Reverend Ames said quickly, and his quickness made the denial worse. "Iron-rich soil. That oak has been drinking it for 100 years. There's a pipe burst," Alex offered. "Old cemetery irrigation or a septic tie. But there's no irrigation, no septic. There's just the church with a dry crawl space and a tin gutter that bangs all winter. The thing about small towns is you don't get to see something that weird and then go home and keep your mouth shut." That night it was on 3 local Facebook groups already. Somebody said their cousin's friend took a sample to a clinic he worked at and it tested as human blood. Somebody else said the coroner was called. Most people laughed. A few got angry about disrespect to the dead. "Let them rest," one woman wrote. "It's just rust." In the middle of all of that, I found an image someone uploaded of the broken stone laid out on a blue tarp. It was cleaner than when I saw it, so the name was clear this time. Dr. Elijah Fletcher, 1849–1897. There was a small line of text under the date that must have been added after he died, a petty afterthought carved into the soft stone. He served. By morning, the county had sent 2 workmen and a tow-behind pump. When I walked back with a coffee and my jacket zipped up against the cold, they were dragging a fat hose like a sleeping snake across the grass. A deputy was there too, lanky guy I vaguely recognized from high school named Hall. He nodded at me and took a sip from a styrofoam cup, steam rising. "Just a precaution," he said like I'd asked. "They think it's blood?" I asked. He made a face that said, "We're not saying that on the record. People don't realize how red dirt can get. You hit a pocket of the right stuff, you'll swear your garden's bleeding." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But when the pump kicked on, the sound rising to a steady mechanical hum, the hose burped out liquid into a waiting barrel, and I watched it curl like smoke inside, dark and slow, and I knew in my gut what my head wasn't ready to say. I set my coffee down and didn't pick it up again. A local history guy showed up around noon. Our town has one of those in every generation, the person who can tell you which farmhouse used to be a post office and what year they moved the road. This one was named Gordon, and he gave tours in the summer for $5 a person and a cookie. He wore a hat that said Historical Society in stitched block letters. "Dr. Fletcher," he said, nodding at the tarp. "He's the one everyone argued about when I rewrote the tour pamphlet. I took his stop off to make time for the stone sheep and that Civil War drummer boy." "Why'd people argue?" I asked. "Depends which town gossip you ask," he said, not unkindly. He worked for the hospital in Altoona. He was accused of stealing cadavers from the pauper's lot to practice new surgical techniques. There were no laws about it then, not really. But there were plenty of opinions. He died of some infection, I think, after cutting his own hand during a demonstration. And then the church buried him because his family paid for a plot. Sometimes people leave rotten tomatoes on his stone on Halloween, which is nonsense and cruel, but I suppose it happens. Gordon leaned over the tarp with hands behind his back. "See how the he served is misaligned? That was added later, not by the family." "Served what?" I asked. "Probably the hospital or his country, depending on who was in charge of the purse that year," he said. "Or it's a joke if you're mean. He served dinner. He served himself." He stood up. "Never seen anything like this, though." He gestured at the barrel with his chin and lowered his voice. "If someone asks me, I'll say iron runoff. That's what I'll type." A few days passed. The county took away the barrel with a lid and no label. They left the hose. The stump stood like a sore tooth in the ground. It rained twice more, that cold, cruel late September rain that feels like a warning. Both times anyone who walked by saw the same thing, a red stain spreading from the broken plot like the ground itself was leaking. Not heavy, not spattering anything, just seeping and shining. A few people gathered to look, then someone would cough and swear and hurry away. The pastor started locking the cemetery gate at dusk. That made me want to go back more, which I recognize says something dumb about me. My friend Janelle, who I've known since middle school, texted me a picture she took over the fence. She doesn't spook easy, but her message under it just said, "Let's not go back there. On the fourth day in the morning, the church had the old stone removed. I watched two men in reflective vests pick up the broken pieces, thread thick straps around them, and lift them with a small crane. They set it in the back of a county truck, as gently as you'd set a sleeping baby, which made the whole thing worse. Right after that, Deputy Hall taped a notice to the church door that said the cemetery was closed for safety reasons, with a date and a signature that looked like it was written in a shaking car. The tape pulled at the paint. You'd think that would be the end of it. They take away the symbol, the crowds move on, and the weather goes back to just being weather. It didn't. That's when it got personal. Alex called me that night at 10. "You hear that?" he asked without saying hello. "Hear what?" He held the phone up and I thought I recognized it. A rhythmic ticking, slightly uneven like a big old clock winding down. Or like the metronome our 10th grade music teacher used to put on the piano and set slightly wrong to make us listen. Tick, 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 tick. "It's in the wall," he said. I thought it was my bathroom fan. I turned off all the power to check. It kept going. I took the cover off the vent and the sound moved into the hall. I closed the vent and the sound moved to the kitchen. "You want me to come over?" I asked. "We live 10 minutes apart if you hit the lights right." "No," he said, then immediately, "Yes, bring Janelle. She'll know if it's pipes." On the way there, the rain started again. I hit a small pool at the curb and water flared up in the headlights and disappeared. I counted off the streetlights because it calmed me. One slow yellow bulb at the corner, one LED with a cold halo by the school, one that flickered like a heartbeat near Alex's place. I kept thinking about the smell by the grave, and for no reason I can explain, I kept wiping my palms on my jeans. Janelle was already there when I pulled up, her hood up and her cheeks wet. She's a contractor, the kind of friend who shows up with a drill and a spare smoke detector if you mention something in passing. She gave me a look that said this felt dumb and then put her hand on my shoulder anyway. Inside, Alex's house was warm and smelled like damp dust. And underneath that, something else. I don't want to be dramatic, but it was antiseptic, faint and clean and wrong in a house with a sagging couch and a magazine pile on the coffee table. Like the air had been scrubbed. We stood in the hallway and listened. Tick, 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 tick. The sound was not in a specific spot. If I turned my head, it moved, like I was following a mosquito in a room. Janelle knelt down and pressed her ear to the baseboard, then stood and went into the bathroom and did it again. She turned on the faucet and turned it off. The sound didn't change. She looked up at us and I saw the moment her face shifted from curiosity to the kind of tight patience you get when you're pretending not to be worried. "What?" Alex asked. "There's no water moving," she said. "It's not the pipes." We followed the sound into the kitchen. It settled near the refrigerator, then slid along the ceiling toward the back door. It stopped on the other side of the door. I opened it and the wet world outside felt like it leaned in. The noise drifted out into the yard, almost smug. I stood under the overhang and watched rain drip from the gutter in neat intervals. Drip, 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 drip. It matched the rhythm and that made me more nervous, not less. Janelle tugged my sleeve and pointed. On the concrete step where the water collected, a thin red fan was spreading. Not much. Not enough to look dramatic in a picture. Just a tint, like someone had stirred food coloring into the puddle with a careful hand. "Clay," I said, but my voice did something strange at the end, bending. "You don't have clay here," Janelle said softly. "You have sand." "You're stepping in it," Alex told me, and I looked down. He was right. I had one foot in the thin fan and one foot out. It had already soaked through the canvas of my sneaker. My stomach made a small, embarrassing flip like I was on a boat. I stepped back and left a clean outline of my shoe. That was the first night. After that, small things stacked up the way dirty dishes do when you're tired and you decide to leave them for the morning. The smell in Alex's house came and went. The faint, sharp note of rubbing alcohol, then something sweeter, almost clove. He said he woke up twice convinced someone had just walked out of his bedroom, leaving the door still quivering in its frame. He took a video of the hallway and said you could see dust moving in the air in waves like breath. He sent it to me and I saw nothing but a dim hall and a picture frame that needed straightening. I didn't mention the way his shadow rode over the wall in the shape of someone taller, because I didn't want to be the one putting shapes on things. I didn't mention the way. When I paused the video at 10 seconds, the stop-time face in the hallway mirror didn't quite look like him. At my place, I tried to forget it. That lasted until I did laundry the next afternoon and the machine made a soft knocking sound. It's an old top loader with a lid that rattles if you don't settle it. I went down to the basement to make sure it wasn't walking itself across the floor, and I found a small, exact circle of red water on the concrete, perfectly still, not touching the washing machine or the drain. It looked placed. I stood there with my hands on the warm enamel lid and said out loud, "No." It didn't move. I wiped it up with a paper towel and threw the towel away in the outside can, like it could do something if I put it in the kitchen trash. You know how people on the internet say, "Pics or it didn't happen"? I did take a picture. It looks like nothing, like a reflection. I deleted it the next day because every time I opened my phone I saw that circle, and I remembered how it felt like refusing something only made it wait. Janelle is the practical one, so she did what practical people do. She made a list. Tree fell on grave, strange seepage, old doctor, stone removed. Red water at Alex's, red water at mine, tick-tick smell. "There's a reason," she said. "We're not crazy. There has to be a reason. Maybe there's an old cistern under the neighborhood and something got into it." She tapped her pen on the table. "Let's go talk to Mr. P. Let's go to the source." That night the three of us went, even though the gate was locked. We didn't have a plan beyond that, which is how these things usually go. The sky was a flat plate and the air had that feeling too warm for the season. The kind of night where the cat doesn't come out of the basement and the dog barks at the door from the other room without getting up. We parked 2 blocks away and walked in with our hands too far from our bodies, like we needed room to reach for something if it happened. Deputy Hall's cruiser was nowhere in sight. A single light glowed over the church's back door and made the rain look like static. Janelle swung herself over the fence near the maple and reached back to help me. Alex went last and caught his jacket on a point and swore under his breath. The cemetery looked different at night, not spooky in the movie way, just smaller and more complicated. The asphalt path reflected the one light like a thought you can't get out of your head. We walked toward where the oak had fallen. Someone had cut it into sections and stacked them on timbers neat as a winter woodpile. The stump was still there, wet and pale, the rings like ribs. The broken plot gaped like a missing tooth. I realized as I stood there that holes in the ground are worse at night, even if they're shallow, because your body knows what it means to go down and not see the bottom. "Look," Alex said. He pointed at the edges of the broken ground. The dirt was damp, not flooded, but the familiar red sheen was there, soaked into the top layer of earth and shining in the light like a coat of varnish. It was pooling in the bevel where the lawn dips around a stone. There was no stone now, but the depressing shape remained. Janelle crouched and held her hand above it like she was warming her fingers at a fire. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I thought she meant the ticking, but what I heard was a different rhythm. The small, sustained squeak of a wheel turned slowly on a dry axle. A cart, a gurney, a tray of instruments pulled along tile. The sound was not loud. It was so soft that my ears only accepted it when I stopped trying to hear it. Alex swore again, not under his breath this time. He took a step back and his heel slid on the wet grass, and I jumped forward to catch him. And maybe we would have laughed if the smell hadn't snapped into place around us at the same time, strong and clean and brutal. It was like opening a sealed bottle of something meant to erase. Blood smell swallowed by alcohol, hands washed to the elbow, cotton, heat. I covered my mouth without meaning to, and my eyes watered. Janelle put her hand on my wrist like she was counting my pulse. "Okay," she said, and her voice sounded like a nurse trying to convince a child. "Okay, we've seen it. We know it's real. We should go." None of us moved. The sound of the cart grew slightly louder, then softer, like it had rolled from one end of the room to the other and back. If you've ever worked in a hospital at night, you know how so many sounds are small but deep. The noise was like that, something that took up space in your chest rather than in your ears. A figure moved in the corner of my eye. I turned my head too fast and saw only a darker darkness. Then I looked back at the ground and there was something new there, an object at the edge of the broken dirt that hadn't been there before. It was a small metal disc, a watch face without hands, or maybe they were too thin to see. It lay half in the wet soil, half on the grass, gleaming. Janelle reached for it and Alex caught her wrist. "Don't," he said, and the way he said it made me sure I would have grabbed it if he hadn't. We stood there breathing and listening to that tiny squeak. Then I heard something else, a man clearing his throat. It was a polite little sound, old-fashioned and absent-minded, as if made by someone rehearsing a speech for an audience he didn't respect. It was not near us. It was near the church. I didn't know what to do with that. Neither did Alex, because when we locked eyes, he had the expression of someone who wants to have the argument later and needs to run now. We did run. Not some horror movie sprint with wild music, just the dumb human run you do when you realize you've stayed too long in a place that doesn't want you. My shoe slid on the wet asphalt and I slapped my hand against a stone to balance, and the top of the stone wobbled like a loose tooth, and I pulled my hand back like it was a hot stove. Janelle vaulted the fence first, and when I followed, I scraped my jeans and didn't feel it. Alex landed, and we all looked back at the same time, because that's what you do. You look to prove to yourself that you can, and to confirm the shape of your fear. The cemetery was the same flat dark. The light over the back door buzzed, and just before it steadied, I saw a silhouette tilt its head like it had been watching us. We didn't tell anyone we'd gone in. We didn't want to be the story. But the next day there was a new story anyway. Mrs. Wilcox, who walks her tiny dog past the church every morning at 6, told the barista that she saw red footprints on the sidewalk headed away from the gate. She said they were small like a boy's and they stopped at the curb and didn't cross. By 10 a.m., 3 people had added details. The prints were barefoot. The prints were in a man's shoe. The prints were just wet leaves stuck to the concrete. The pastor said nothing. The deputy did, though. He told a reporter the church had decided to remove the stump entirely and reseed the ground. "We're restoring dignity to the cemetery," he said. The phrase made it into the paper. People taped it to the bulletin board at the coffee shop and underlined it in different colors with different meanings. I started noticing the red in other places. Not pools, not even stains, just a tint where water collected and set. Under a downspout near the library, along the lip of a flower pot at the hardware store, a faint blush on the inside of a gutter. Once the inside of my wrist where I rested it on my car in the rain and then brought my arm inside to pay for gas. I put my thumb to the wet mark and it looked pink on my skin. I washed my hands twice in the bathroom and it went away, and I stared at the hand dryer while it blew my hair into my face and thought of nothing at all. Janelle told me she woke up at 3 a.m. to a noise in her driveway, looked out, and saw the shape of a man leaning into the bed of her truck. She admitted later she made herself stand there and count to 100 before moving, because she didn't want to flinch, like she was scared of a person who might need help. When she turned on the porch light, the driveway was empty. There was a small circle of condensation on the passenger window, as if a hand had pressed there, and then evaporated in a breath. Alex went quiet. He's not a quiet person. I called twice and he let it go to voicemail. When he finally answered on the third try, his voice sounded delicate and careful, like a glass you know has a crack and you're trying not to make it worse. "I'm okay," he said. "I'm just tired." "You hear the ticking?" "No," he said. "Not anymore." Then after a pause, "Now it's the sound of gloves." "What? Have you ever watched a doctor put on gloves slowly?" he asked. "They hold the cuff at the wrist and work the air out with their fingers. It makes a little thud when it settles." He made the sound and it was nothing like a thud, but my stomach recognized it anyway. "I'm coming over," I said. "No," he said again, but his no didn't have a reason attached to it, and that made me go anyway. His house was dark except for the TV, which was playing one of those shows where pairs of people buy broken places and teach you to feel good about fixing them. I knocked and then let myself in. The room smelled like it had been cleaned too hard and not at all, somehow both. Alex was on the couch with his head back and his mouth open. He started when I touched his shoulder and swore and then apologized. He looked like he hadn't slept, but he smiled and told me I was dramatic. We watched 2 segments of the show and then he said, "You remember when we were little and we got caught drinking grape juice at Grandma's wake, and Dad told us to keep it down because the dead are trying to listen?" "Dad never said that," I said. He frowned. "Didn't he?" We fell asleep on opposite ends of the couch sometime after midnight with the volume low. I woke up to the TV's blue screen and the small sound of something tapping against glass. Tap, 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 tap. It came from the kitchen. I stood and the couch springs made that old man grunt noise they make, and I winced at the idea of waking Alex. Which is silly because he's my brother, and I used to hit him with pillows. But this felt like the kind of night where you don't want to surprise anyone, even someone who loves you. In the kitchen, the tap came again, careful, exact. The back door window was fogged, which made no sense because the night was cool. A round spot cleared for a second at eye level, someone breathing against it from the other side, and then fogged again. I didn't get closer. I turned on the porch light from where I stood, and the fog disappeared too fast, like a held breath finally released. On the concrete step, rain gathered and did that red shimmer for a moment, then diluted to ordinary gray and ran into the grass. I didn't wake Alex. I went back to the couch and watched the dark till it softened. The next day, the county took the stump. They shaved it down with a grinder until it was a flat disc and then scooped the rest like a scoop of ice cream out of a tub. They filled the hole with clean soil that looked wrong and new, and smoothed it with a metal rake. They reseeded. They put up a sign with a smiling clip art reminding people to keep off the grass while it takes. Mr. P stood with his palms on his hips, watching, and I think he knew better than to say anything. For a week after that, it didn't rain. The sky went flinty blue, and the leaves crisped at the edges, and everyone pretended it was a good stretch of weather, even though it made the air jittery. People ripped out their mums early and put up fake spiderwebs that blew across the sidewalk and stuck to your ankles. I got groceries and went to work and told myself I had a story I could keep if I wanted. Weird runoff and nerves. Janelle made me go to a candle shop that put cinnamon into the air like it was a weapon. We made fun of the names: Bonfire Walk, Sweater Weather, Hometown Harvest. We bought one called First Frost and joked about lighting it after October. Then it rained again. Not even a proper rain. A mist that soaked your hairline and made the stripes on the crosswalk slick. I was in the car, idling at the light by the church because some delivery truck had blocked the right turn, when I noticed people looking over at the fence. 2 teenagers stood there with their hands hooked in the diamond holes, cigarettes pinched and forgotten between their fingers. A man in a reflective vest leaned on his shovel handle. He and the teens weren't together, but they were all looking at the same place, the patch of new earth where the stump had been. I know you know what I'm about to say. You don't need me to say it. I'll say it anyway because leaving it out would feel like lying. The patch was seeping again. It was small at first, like blushing. Then it darkened the way watercolor does when it spreads to the edges of the paper. It gathered in the bevel where a stone should have been and wasn't, and then paused, like it might listen. I drove away without meaning to because the light changed and the truck moved and my foot did what you train a foot to do. At the next block, I pulled over and called Alex. There's no satisfying ending to this if that's what you want. The storm didn't blow the church down. No ghost assessed his own grave. There was no mob, no confession. What I have is this: a cemetery that keeps bleeding very quietly after rain. The smell of antiseptic that shows up in kitchens and hallways and makes you remember all the times you were a child in a waiting room. A faint squeak of a wheel on a clean floor, and a watch face with no hands that I didn't let my friend touch. What I have is the sound I hear sometimes if I stand under a leaky gutter. Tick, 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 and the way it syncs up with my heart until I don't know who is setting the pace. I have the way my brother now avoids the back door at night. He uses the front like an old man and pretends it's habit. I have the way Janelle sends me pictures of puddles that look ordinary with the caption, "Just water." And I always look too long anyway. Last week I went to put flowers on my dad's grave one town over. He's not near the old church. He's in the newer cemetery with the wide lanes and a sign that says plot maps available in office. It rained the night before, and a fine mist hung over the low stones like breath. I stood there and put the mums down and straightened the little flag left over from the 4th of July. Because even though Dad didn't go to war, he liked the way the red, white, and blue moved in the breeze. And then I watched a robin hop across the grass near my foot, tilt its head at something I couldn't see, and drink from a thin red line that had formed along the edge of the paved path. It lifted its head, thought about what it had just done, and flew away in a straight line like it was late. I told myself it was rust. I told myself iron is everywhere. I told myself this is nothing and I should not go home and stare at my sink and listen for a noise that won't come until I expect it least. I told myself not to check my shoes, but I did. And there, along the stitching where the rubber meets the canvas, a faint blush had dried into the fabric that wouldn't wash out later no matter how much soap I used. You can say dye. You can say it was already there and I only saw it now because I needed something to see. You might be right, but I keep thinking about the man clearing his throat. That polite little sound near the church door. When I hear it in my kitchen, yes, it's in my kitchen now, though only when I'm not trying. To hear it, I don't look around for a person, I look for a puddle, look for the smallest place where water might Gather if it had decided it didn't want to be. Ordinary that day. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I don't even know if I want you to go look, because if you do, the next red puddle might not be in a cemetery. It might be in your driveway or the corner of your basement. A neat circle on clean concrete with no reason. If you see it, don't touch it. Don't even breathe on it if you can help it. You'll think that's superstitious, but you'll hold your breath anyway. And when you finally let it out, listen carefully to how the air moves. If you hear a gentle squeak or the soft thud of a glove settling at a wrist, if you taste metal just for a second, if the ticking does not match your clock, don't say my name. Don't say any name at all. Just step back, let the water be what it insists on being, and walk away with your hands open and your sleeves rolled down. Because some service doesn't end just because we take down the marker and reseed the grass. Some hands keep washing themselves long after the work is done, and some graves keep bleeding, especially when the rain is light, and the world is quiet and there's nothing to weigh those small sounds down. And if you happen to notice your reflection in the window, and you think for a second the face doesn't look like, you get like the mouth is set with a humorless patience you've never seen on yourself, turn off the light and pretend you never saw that either. I promised at the start that saying this might let me sleep. That was a lie. I told myself to keep going. Since the storm, I've slept like someone is waiting for me to finish a task I don't remember starting. I wake up with clean, dry hands and a feeling I did something carefully and precisely all night. The sink is always dry. The towels are always folded. The house smells faintly of cloves some mornings. It rains again tonight. Forecast says it'll be steady after midnight. I keep telling myself not to listen. I keep promising I won't go look at the back step, but the ticking has already lined itself up with the drip from the gutter, and the sound of someone clearing their throat by the door is just polite enough that it would be rude not to get up. I never planned to write this, and I'm not looking for validation or points. My hands just won't stop shaking whenever I pass a cemetery. And it's gotten bad enough that I can't sleep without a light on, which at my age is embarrassing, so maybe putting it all down will help. I've always been the practical one. I'm the person who checks the batteries in the smoke alarm on the first of the month and keeps a spare phone charger in my bag. My sister jokes that if I ever get haunted, I'll make the ghost fill out a risk assessment. I used to think that was funny. Then last spring, I was living in a basement flat near Highgate in London, one of those skinny places tucked down a set of moist cement steps, with a door that sticks when it rains and windows that sit at pavement level so you see shoes go by like migrating beetles. I worked late shifts at a small theater bar on Archway Road and walked home around midnight most nights. The route took me along a long iron fence bordering an old cemetery. I'm not superstitious. I liked the quiet. You could hear your own footsteps there, and the foxes arguing in the hedges and the buses far off like a sea in your ears. The streetlights spread weak orange halos on the wet stones, and the cemetery itself was mostly shadow, except where the path curved and you got a sliver of moon across the pointed tops of the monuments. My sister, Hannah, had been crashing with me for a week because her flat was being fumigated for moths. She's younger, breezier, an art teacher who paints her nails while she waits for water to boil, the kind of person who buys carnations because they're underrated. We'd fall asleep to sitcom reruns and complain about the neighbors who kept their recycling on the landing. I had this friend Amir too. He ran lights at the theater, and he'd stop by after close to split leftovers, then head to his night bus. Normal, unexciting routines. The cemetery fence was part of that routine, like the squeaky second stair or the click of the kettle. Until one Thursday when, as I passed the fence, I heard a child laugh. Not shrieking, not the horror movie sound. It was a toddler giggle, soft and sticky sweet. The kind kids make when they discover they can make a sound and they like it. It came from the cemetery side, somewhere beyond the iron bars. I slowed, because what would a child be doing out there at 12:15 a.m.? The giggle bubbled again, higher up, as if the child were closer to the top of the slope where the newer graves were. I remember the air smelled of wet leaves and diesel. Somewhere a siren went by and the laugh cut through the gap like a bird in a warehouse. I told myself it was a fox. Foxes make odd noises. I kept walking. The giggle followed. Not a straight line. More like it moved from stone to stone, punctuating the spaces between my steps. I don't know how to describe that part without sounding dramatic, but it's important. The sound didn't echo. It slid. Like it knew where I'd look if I looked, and it always stayed just outside that slice of my attention. When I got to my door, I fumbled the key twice. The third time, as the lock finally gave with its stubborn clack, the giggle sounded very close to the fence at my shoulder height. Behind me, I didn't look. I stepped in, shoved the door with my hip, and leaned on it until the latch caught. Hannah was asleep on the couch under a blanket with cartoon avocados. The tiny TV was still on, blue light stuttering across her forehead. I stood there long enough to feel foolish. I made tea. By the time the water boiled, I had decided it was some teenager messing about with a Bluetooth speaker. I didn't mention it to Hannah because it would have turned into an hour of ghost impressions and jokes about sad British parks. I scrolled my phone until my eyelids went rubbery, then fell asleep with my socks still on. The next night, after the bar closed, Amir and I walked to the corner together. He turned left toward the bus stop. I went right along the fence. We were mid-conversation about a volunteer who kept reprogramming the light cues like he worked at the National Theater when it happened again. That silly, breathy giggle, like air blown over the lip of a bottle, this time popping up from behind a low stone. I stopped and said, "Do you hear that?" Amir tilted his head. We both listened. At first, nothing. Then faint but clear, the giggle, and somewhere in there a kind of hiccup, as if the child had laughed too hard and swallowed the rest. He frowned. "That's not a fox," he said. We stood for another 30 seconds, waiting for a parent's voice or footsteps or anything. Nothing except the train whir of cars on Highgate Hill and a breeze working through ivy. "Maybe someone's in there," Amir said. "You okay to walk past?" I nodded because I was trying very hard to be the sensible person I had always been. We walked on. When we passed a stretch where the fence widened to accommodate a locked service gate, something clinked against the bars from the inside, like a coin flicked against metal. Amir stopped dead. I put a hand on his arm and felt his jacket seam under my palm, and underneath it the jump of his tricep. He said barely above a whisper, "Nope." He turned to walk me all the way to my door, which he'd never done. The laugh came once more, and I swear it pitched itself higher as if to imitate us. When he left, we both pretended we hadn't heard anything. He texted when he got on his bus, and just before I put the phone down, the laugh rippled by my window, thinner now, as if it had been stretched out by distance. I did look then. All I saw was my reflection and the yellow blot from the street lamp above the steps. On Saturday, the neighbor upstairs, an older woman named Pauline who wore slippers that scuffed the stairs and who smelled like lavender sachets, knocked on my door to ask if I'd heard children in the night. Her hair was in foamy curlers and she looked embarrassed. "I thought it was the telly at first," she said, "but the telly was off." I told her we'd heard something too, probably kids in the park across the road. She nodded like she wanted to agree with me. Then she said, "It didn't sound right," and made a face as if she'd tasted a lemon. I tried to be proactive. I called the council's non-emergency number and said maybe there were teens accessing the cemetery after hours. "Trespassing," I said, because it felt better to give the weird thing a proper adult word. The man on the phone thanked me and said someone would have a look. For a day and a half, the fence was quiet. The way a room is quiet after you stop a clock that's ticked so long you stopped noticing it. I fell asleep quickly Sunday night and woke just before dawn from a dream where I was late for an exam, in a school I didn't recognize. The light in the room was gray-blue, the color of tin. On my nightstand, my charging cable had uncoiled itself and was looped in a figure 8. I could hear the soft pat of rain on the steps to the street. I listened for buses. I listened for foxes. I listened for that silly, wrong giggle. I heard nothing and felt relief sink through me like warm water. Monday, I had the early shift and left home at 4:30, which meant the road was empty and the sky was a deep slate with a bruise of pink down low. The cemetery fence was darker than the street, a cutout shape. On the gate, a white paper notice flapped. Maintenance, green spaces depth, groundsman on site. I kept walking, and that's when I saw movement in the cemetery. A small figure crouched at the base of a tree behind the first row of stones. "Instinct," said Fox. Then it shifted, and the shape wasn't animal. It was a child wearing something pale. He was pawing at the dirt with both hands the way kids play at the beach. Tiny scooping motions, intent. I stopped because, again, why would a child be there? My mouth was open to call out when the groundsman appeared from behind a mausoleum, a bright green jacket distorted by dew, and casually walked toward the figure. He didn't seem hurried, which calmed me. Maybe he knew this child. Maybe it was connected to the notice. The child didn't run. The groundsman reached out, said something I couldn't hear, and the child turned its head. It was very pale. I had the sudden, ridiculous thought that the child was powdery, like someone who had been working with flour. Then the groundsman bent like he was about to lift them. I blinked. The child was gone, not like vanished in a puff. It was as if, while I blinked, the child hopped behind the stone. I waited for it to reappear. It didn't. The groundsman peered at the spot, shook his head like a person who's misplaced their keys, and glanced toward the fence. I pretended to be fascinated by my shoelace and hurried off. I told Hannah that evening, in the casual way you tell someone about a vaguely interesting neighbor incident. Her face went sharp in a way I don't often see. "Don't go in there," she said. I laughed like she'd said not to stick my fork in a socket. She wasn't amused. "I'm serious. We can light a candle or something if that makes you feel better, but don't go in." I didn't plan to. The idea of going through the gate made my stomach feel hollow. Later, when Amir came by, we swapped ghost stories in the way people do when they want to domesticate fear with jokes. He told one about his cousin who swears old flats keep a running inventory of all the arguments they've hosted. Sometimes they replay bits like tapes. We laughed. But when I walked him to the corner, we both slowed at the service gate. There were scuff marks on the ground near the bars, like small shoes had turned too fast and dragged. Amir crouched. "Probably kids," he said, but it sounded like a rehearsal. I pointed to the notice still flapping. "Groundsman," I said, as if that neutralized everything. We stood there too long, and then from deeper in the cemetery came a soft clapping sound. Like two small hands pressed together exactly twice, clap, clap. Amir straightened. Neither of us said the obvious. Clapping is not a fox thing. We left, and a few steps down the pavement I heard the giggle again, closer than it ought to have been. Sleep fractured after that. 2 nights later, I woke at 2:13 a.m. to what I thought was my phone buzzing from Ahmed in front of house, but it was only the fridge humming unevenly. I lay there, eyes open to the dark, ears straining. A giggle spooled out from my window grating, as if it were coming up through the basement area well. It was soft, almost shy, as if asking permission to be louder. I said out loud because it felt practical. "No." The giggle hiccuped and fell silent. I don't know if that part was in my head. What was not in my head were the marks I found the next morning on the outside of the glass. Smears like someone's palms had pressed there, small and distinct, with spaces that would fit tiny fingers. Kids in the building, I told myself. Condensation catches everything. I wiped them with a tea towel. When I came back from a late shift the next night, they were there again, lower this time, like the person pressing had crouched. On Friday, I stopped a police car that was idling near the takeaway. 2 officers slumped in the blue-lit interior with paper coffee cups. I told them someone was messing around in the cemetery at night. The younger officer asked if I'd seen anyone. I said a child. I felt stupid the moment it left my mouth and meandered into an explanation about Bluetooth speakers and teenage pranks. They said they'd loop in the patrol. That evening, I saw 2 beams of light moving through the graves for a while, and I slept harder. In the morning, there was a plastic bag caught on one of the iron spikes that hadn't been there before, and the groundsman's notice had a smear of mud along the bottom where something had flicked it. Pauline on the landing told me the police had knocked for her too, and asked if anyone small lived in the building. She clucked. Small, as if that clarifies anything. The tipping point happened the following Tuesday, a night so clear and cold the air had the cut glass sparkle you get before a proper frost. Hannah had gone back to her place, Amir was on an overnight call at a different venue, and I was alone in the flat with a mug of soup and a borrowed paperback. I heard the first laugh at 10:30. I told myself to ignore it. The second one at 11 was accompanied by the scrape of something on stone. The third, nearer midnight, settled right outside the window like a cat waiting to be let in. By then, my heart was climbing into my throat and my palms were slick. I turned up the TV. The laugh rose to meet the volume like a game child plays at a party, louder, louder. I paused the show. It paused too. The flat seemed to lean toward the window. I sat very still, the way prey sits very still to spare itself being seen, and that's when the door buzzer sounded. One long mono note that vibrated the air in the hall. It's not a buzzer anyone uses at that hour. I went to the door and listened, forehead pressed to damp wood. The window grating was directly to my right. I could have reached out and touched the rusty bars if the glass hadn't been there. The buzzer stopped. Then lightly, the patter of small footsteps on the steps and a shadow passing across the frosted pane like a cloud, not up but down, like someone had gone from the street level to the little courtyard outside my window. And then a whisper, not words, a sound shaped like laughter trying to remember how to be speech. I shouldn't have, but I opened the door. It stuck, as it always does, and took a shove. The stairwell air had that weird feel cold air sometimes has, like you've opened the fridge and it's pushed your breath back into you. The street at the top of the steps was empty. Light from a street lamp pooled on the wet pavement. Down at the bottom, on the flat space outside my window, someone had drawn loops in the condensation on the glass. Lazy, long loops like the number 8 tilted sideways. Water beaded and ran in threads. The laugh came not from the street, not from the window, but from behind me in the hallway. I turned and the door swung shut with more force than I'd meant to use. My heart made that hollow knock it makes when you miss a step in the dark. I said again like a scolding auntie, "No." Something like breath crinkled the old paper on the hall wall, as if a draft had moved behind it. That's the only way I can describe it. A change in the room like fabric being shifted just out of sight. I slept sitting up with the lights on, which is not as restful as people say. The next morning, I had 2 crescent-shaped marks on my forearm. Not cuts, not bruises, just pale pressure marks like you get if a child grabs you without malice but with determination. I rubbed them and they didn't immediately fade. Amir came by that evening and insisted on walking the fence with me while it was still light. We bought takeaway chips and shared them from the paper as we walked, because it's hard to be scared when you're burning your fingers on hot potatoes. The maintenance notice was gone from the gate. A different paper was cable-tied there now, this one official, with a crest. Please note, due to recent incidents, the cemetery will close at 6 p.m. until further notice. I felt a childish relief that someone else acknowledged there had been incidents and an adult dread that we were included in that phrase. We talked loudly about nothing. A man in a fluorescent vest walked a small elderly dog with a raincoat. 2 teenagers took photos of the ivy. A bus sighed. In full day, the world is very normal. Near the corner, we saw the groundsman in green talking to a woman with a clipboard. He looked older up close than he had at a distance, lines under his eyes like pencil shading. I said, "Excuse me, have you noticed kids getting in?" He shook his head slowly. The clipboard woman answered, "We've had complaints about noises. Could be foxes." The groundsman said nothing, but after a beat he looked at me properly and said in a low voice, "Don't encourage it. The way you'd say, 'Don't feed the crows,' that night was the worst." Around 1, I woke to a hiss of static. At first I thought it was a neighbor's TV through the wall. Then I realized it was my phone and my heart did that hamster in its wheel sprint. The voice recorder app was open. I hadn't opened it. It was recording. I picked it up, thumb shaking, and hit stop. The file saved. For reasons I still can't unpack. Stubbornness, familiarity, the way we replay videos of conversations to hear our own voice. I pressed play. For 20 seconds, there was only the staticky hum of a cheap microphone in a quiet room. Then, muffled as if my phone were under a pillow at a children's party, the giggle, a small intake of breath, a huff. Then, unmistakably, 2 syllables that might have been my name if spoken by a person who had only heard it, never said it. I dropped the phone, picked it up again, hit delete, and watched the little trash can icon do nothing for a beat too long before the file vanished. I plugged the phone into the charger, turned it face down, and whispered, "No," because saying it any louder felt like asking for a reply. The next day I left early for work and stopped by the small Anglican church near the tube station. I am not devout. The church smelled like dust and pew varnish and faint lilies. A young vicar with tired, kind eyes was arranging hymnals. I asked him, as neutrally as possible, if there were any recent burials for children in the cemetery. He flinched as if I'd asked a rude question, then looked stricken that he'd flinched. "We don't manage that ground," he said. "But there were some historical plots relocated years back. Records are spotty." I told him someone might be trespassing, which was true in one sense. He offered to notify the council. I said thank you. He asked in a voice meant to be casual if I was all right. I said I was. He gave me a pamphlet on coping with grief. I took it to be polite, even though I wasn't grieving anyone, at least not in the way he meant. Outside, rain had started, a soft, steady rain that makes the city smell like stone. Hannah came by with a bag of groceries and a small, battery-operated tea light. "It's for the window," she said, very matter of fact. "A little warmth." She set it on the sill inside the glass, and we watched its fake flame flicker as traffic went by. We didn't talk about why she'd brought it. That night, the laugh did not come. The night after, it didn't come either. I closed my eyes to the plastic candle's faint glow and felt absurdly soothed. On the third night, sometime after 3 a.m, the tea light clicked as its battery died. That tiny sound woke me like a shout. The room fell into a deeper dark, and a cold that didn't come from weather lapped over me. The way a shadow feels heavier when a cloud moves in front of the sun. In that dark, at my window grating, that small patter of hands. A patient rub against the glass, up and down, as if someone were trying to clean it with their palms. A giggle, lower, almost sleepy. I lay still and counted my breaths. When morning came, the glass had fogged and cleared in a pattern like the arcs of tiny hands. There were scratches in the condensation again, but not loops this time. Little verticals, as if something had tried to pull. I bought proper blackout curtains that afternoon. I told myself it was because the streetlight was affecting my sleep. I installed them and kept them open in the day so I could prove to myself that I wasn't hiding. That evening, I saw the groundsman again as I passed the fence. He leaned on a spade and looked at the ground the way people look at water when they want to guess its depth. I said hello. He said hello back without looking up. Then he asked, "Do you live in the basement over there?" and pointed deliberately past my shoulder. I said I did. He nodded like that confirmed something unremarkable. After a silence that is now carved into my memory, he said, "Sometimes when they move stones, when they make space, they don't. You know?" He trailed off. I said, "Don't what?" He shrugged. "Mark things properly." I didn't want to understand. He set the spade against the gate. "It's best not to answer," he said, and then very quietly, "It's best not to laugh back." I stopped going past the cemetery at night. I took the longer route that went by the off-licenses and kebab shops and felt normal in its stink and brightness. A week went by. The laugh didn't follow me. I started to think my nerves had spiked and then subsided as they do after the flu. Then on a Wednesday afternoon, I came home to find a damp patch on the wall under the window that looked like a child's handprint, the way tea leaves sometimes arrange themselves into a shape you recognize. It was smaller than my palm. I touched it because I still believed in material explanations. It was only water. It left a darker oval on my fingertip. The last thing, the thing that made me move, happened in broad daylight. It was a sunny Saturday with a clean breeze that made the world feel laundered. Hannah and I went for coffee and walked past a small market, holding up handmade ceramics and laughing about prices. On the way back, we passed the cemetery in full shining day. Families were taking selfies at the gates. A boy on a scooter rattled past. The iron glinted, and from somewhere deep in the green, where the stones thicken and the ground drops away, there came that same laugh, light as air. Hannah's hand tightened on my arm so hard I felt her nails through my coat. And then a second laugh answered, a little higher, a little thinner, like a harmony. We stood and the world continued around us as if we were extras pausing while the scene moved on. The groundsman at the far side of the path looked up sharply. His gaze went from the dark patch under the yew tree to us, to the iron bars and back again. He raised a hand not to wave, but in a gesture that meant hold. Or stop. That night I packed a bag. The next day I sublet the flat to a musician friend who liked the basement for its sound. I told myself I was leaving because of damp. I didn't tell Hannah. She already knew. I told Amir. He said if my new place ended up backing onto a school playground, I'd be furious at the noise. We made plans for a housewarming that I postponed twice because I wasn't sleeping, and I wanted to be alert enough to enjoy it. I'm in a different area now. One with wide streets and a park that has a pond and the kind of ducks that always look slightly offended. There's no cemetery on my route home. The first week I woke at the slightest sound. Gradually my body accepted the new silence. I stopped checking the window glass each morning. I still keep the tea light on my sill because habits turn into ritual when you don't watch them. 2 nights ago, the neighbor's baby monitor clicked through the thin wall. I heard the baby cooing, a tiny rise and fall like a kettle warming. Then underneath it, very clearly, a laugh. The baby's laugh, probably. I told myself to go back to sleep. The laugh came again, and in the space between those two sounds, there was a tight little hiccup like someone who had laughed too hard and swallowed air. I held the duvet up to my face and breathed in cotton and heat and tried not to count. I haven't walked back past the iron fence since I moved. Today I was on the bus and it slowed for traffic. We stopped opposite an old stone wall with ivy fat as ropes. A woman was coming out of a side gate carrying a bunch of white flowers. She paused on the pavement and looked behind her toward the graves, the way a person checks to see if they've locked the door, and smiled to herself, a sad, private smile. As we pulled away, I swear I saw through the black bars. In the gray space where the path curves, something small crouched on the ground, intent on its work, tiny hands in the dirt, as calm as if it had all the time in the world. I blinked, of course, and it was only a pale stone half buried in leaves. Right now, as I'm typing this, I can hear a bus sighing down the road and someone's shoes scuffing the pavement outside, and my own kettle, because I put it on out of habit and forgot to make tea. The window is closed. The tea light flickers with its fake obedient flame. The room is normal. I'm a practical person who believes practical things. But sometimes when the fridge hums and then glides into quiet, there's a beat of silence so complete that anything could step into it and say your name like it was trying it on to see if it fits. And you'll swear that somewhere, not far, a child finds that sound so funny it can't help but laugh.